I was burned one time, so we'll have to see. All right, we are live. I think one can never be too sure here, but I'm pretty sure we are. So joining me today, a very special guest as always, Josh Weisberg. Josh, can you say a little bit about who you are and what you do for those who might not know you?
So I'm Josh Weisberg. I'm a professor at University of Houston, and I went, like our esteemed host, to the CUNY Graduate Center and studied with David Rosenthal years back. And I work mainly in consciousness studies, philosophy of mind, and that's always been my focus. But I have interest in philosophy of science generally, and philosophy of language, but it kind of pisses me off. And but I'm edging also toward political philosophy in a weird way, but I might talk about that later. But yeah, so I'm a kind of dyed-in-the-wool consciousness guy.
And you know, I sort of, in my mind, think of us as having went to grad school together. But actually, when I was thinking about it, I don't know if you were done already when I got there. So
no, so this is, these are things you shouldn't tell your grad students, or you should. I was in grad school for 11 years, and so I started in 96 and I ended in 2007.
Okay.
So if you were in there.
I was there in 2003.
Yeah. So, I remember you fresh-faced and optimistic, and then they crushed the life out of you. Yeah, and you recovered. Yeah, it was great. Just like everybody.
Oh, the good old days. Yes, exactly. That's CUNY issue is a whole separate podcast. So we'll gloss over that one. But yes, that's from the old school. So you were there for 4 years when I was there. I guess I always thought of you as a already accomplished philosopher. So I didn't realize.
I was probably ABD, and so I wasn't taking class. So that how it is. But
right, you were one of those queued up, waiting to be approved by certain people.
Yeah, took a while.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then you've been at University of Houston basically ever since. I mean, I remember when you got the call, getting that job. You were at Brooklyn College, I think, at a reception.
That's right.
Yeah, and you came back and you were like, "I got the fucking job, dude." I was like, "Yeah."
Yeah, no, that was awesome. And it was like the weird. I was lucky when I came out, and I actually had several job offers, but not in places cool places. Don't want to dismiss these people, but I was much more psyched to be at Houston, and it's been a great program, and my colleagues are awesome. And we have a master's program, which is kind of this, it's like we teach full-blown graduate courses, seminars, but we don't feel quite as guilty as then they don't get jobs. Like we send them to someone else so they don't get jobs. So we feel like, it wasn't our fault. So yeah, we feel pretty good about that. So if anyone's interested in that, they can apply to it. I'm also the graduate director, or the admissions director. So
okay, no, that's good to know, because people ask me about terminal master's programs, and I hadn't really been thinking of University of Houston as a place to.
Yeah, no, we're part of this, kind of group of terminal master's programs where we get really awesome people. Usually it's kind of a fallback just in case people don't get into their top PhD, or they want to, or they're coming from somewhere else. Like they just, they're smart people who don't have the tools. And so we're kind of a finishing school to get you in a PhD program if that's what you want to do, or to learn with less pain and suffering that this is not what you want to do, but maybe you want to go to law school or, seminary with the people. I've had enough. Get you to a nunnery, and withdraw from society altogether. That we can provide that service. So, but it's cool, and I think we have a good program, and apply if that's your thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, good to know. And you just came out with this book, Explanatory, Optimism, and the Hard Problem of Consciousness, which I don't have a physical copy, otherwise I'd hold it up. But yes, there it is.
Yeah. Anyways, by the good people at Rutledge, thank you to Andy Beck and others at Rutledge for digging the project, and and to all those suckers who got a little bit of money to read it, and those of you who've actually read it, which is cool.
I've read it twice now, so
woo! You're like
of the game,
the world expert on it, then.
No, I really enjoyed it. By the way, it's obviously well written, got a lot of good philosophy in there, but also your signature sense of humor comes through, and your little jokes.
I I can't help myself with that.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I should a little backstory. It was not interesting in a certain sense, but it was rejected by a more august and learned press
Oh,
in England. They have a
oh.
bridge over with ox and stuff. Anyway, they rejected it, and one of the reviewers said his sense of humor is unrelenting. And I was like, oh, I'm touched. I fear I do breathe my last. I was like, you fucking Oxford bastard.
Exactly.
And
Dude,
they were
really
so
said
right.
that
I mean,
in a review?
and this is the revised thing I sent to Raleigh had less jokes. So it tells you how many jokes I had in the Oxford, which of course you don't send jokes to Oxford. It's just not their
Okay,
thing.
yeah. I mean, I appreciated the jokes. I thought they were droll and amusing.
Thank you. Yeah, you get me.
Wow. Okay, I did not know that was a criticism. You now Weisberg the unrelenting,
The unrelenting.
like
Yeah.
Nandor. Um, so yeah, I wonder if you could tell us. I have a lot of questions I want to ask you about this, but I wonder if you could start by just saying a little bit by what you mean about explanatory optimism and the way you set up the debate between the pessimists and the optimists.
So one more editing note: the draft I sent to Oxford, I didn't call it optimism. I called it mediocrity.
Oh no!
And I was like, because I was like, look, we're no different than anything else. We're this, like, we think we're special. Like, I'm so special, and like, no, we're just the same old boring crap as everything. And that didn't sell. And so I just changed the word to optimism, and they was like, yes, what a great book. So you gotta love editing. But I mean, the idea is basically, and it's and I say it throughout, like, people like David Armstrong and Paul Churchland and others, and Daniel Dennett and David Rosenthal. It just seems like, look, science has been kicking some ass for some hundreds of years, and it seems like a plausible assumption that science is going to be able to explain everything about us, or at least a plausible enough working hypothesis. Like, we start with that, and see how far you get. And it's going to take a long time. We're very complex. Our brains are the most complex thing, yada, yada. But we don't yet know that good direction isn't going to work. And so then along come, and they've always been there, these arguments, of course, in the modern form, really, Chalmers, of course, David Chalmers is really the great developer of these ideas, but others like Philip Goff, who you might be watching right now instead of this.
He's wearing a Christmas jumper on his own channel currently.
Or maybe you have a split screen. You've got
right.
Can't have enough philosophy of mind. But so there's lots of these arguments in philosophy that somehow we already know that you can't get there from here. It's just not going to happen. And so we should stop doing that and start doing something else. And so optimism is the idea. No. Come on, we can do this. Like, don't give up yet. Geez, we've just gotten started here. And this is a plausible starting point. And why wouldn't you start there? And then the next episode, they say, well, because come on, like, are you not having conscious experience? Like, it's pretty obvious that this is not the normal thing here, or the tools of normal science are just not going to get this. And so we already can tell that. So, like, stop with this. Like, we know this is a break point, and we need to now move to something more, it may be physicalist, in some expanded sense, or it may just be sort of something more, or, on out to full-blown dualism. And so, then the step is to say, look, so wait, let's go back. What is this that we're such that we know that it rules out my optimistic approach? And so then you focus on how things appear in conscious experience. And then the goal is to provide a debunking argument to say, look, so the evidence is supposed to come from the experiences. And if we can show that it's viable or flawed in some way, then we can undermine that pessimistic kind of whatever, that conclusion or intuition or whatever it is. And so I then undertake that, and I try to say, okay, lay that out. And then can I provide a plausible kind of story that would provide this sort of undermining or undercutting, is what they call in epistemology, claim for this first person evidence. And I developed what I call the ACT model, automated compression theory. which, if you remember, you should remember, it used to be called the cat
No,
model.
I was wondering what your cat did to piss you off and why I got
Nothing.
shamed.
I that was, I think, maybe, my self-censoring. It was too funny. I don't know.
Okay. Act is more serious than cat.
It turned out there's a bunch of social sciences. There's all kinds of things called act. So anyway, so I'm not so it sounds much more, respectable. There's probably things called cat too. But anyways, compression and automation together, I think, are the two pieces that will provide this plausible story. If these two kinds of things are going on inside of us, it would look this way. Oops. Sorry, you get me? My internet may have just frozen.
Yeah, you're frozen, but I can still hear you.
Oh, that's cool. Well, it's not cool that I froze, but it's good you can still hear me. So these two pieces, automation and compression, can, I think, plausibly provide a story about why things seem this way, even if they don't indicate something that is unexplainable in scientific terms.
Yeah. So I want to ask a bunch of questions. I mean, on a side note, I would say when I first read this book, I was surprised that you're arguing for that which you are not as well known for, because I think most people would associate you with defending the kind of Rosenthal-style higher order theory, and that almost doesn't figure in the book at all. I mean, it shows up here and there, obviously, but this is largely just a project in good old-fashioned philosophy of mind, where you try to show that we should be more optimistic about the chances for physicalism. So I was like, oh, I mean, you have a couple papers on this maybe, but I was surprised that this is sort of
right. I mean, it's a general solution. So what I wanted to, and what I say in the book too, is like, the question about what theory of consciousness is the correct theory, I think, is an empirical question, right? And so partly what the ACT part is doing is clearing the ground. So all these conceptual and modal and conceivability kind of problems are pushed are put aside, and now you're just left saying, okay, empirically, what's best? Higher order thought, global workspace, first order, recurrent, whatever, and they have to fight it out in that realm. Right. And now there, of course, I think higher order thought wins. But
your case isn't really
I think that's
on
that. I mean, I think also people look at higher order thought. This is, you've had this experience, I'm sure. I mean, and they think it's a conceptualist sort of theory, like, oh, it's sort of not empirical. And Rosenthal's always been, he's playing on this line because he's in the manifest image, or the sort of common sense side of things, and not and I get that, but at the same time, broadly, I'd like to think of it as an empirical hypothesis. I think, in a sense, everything is, and so, I want to rule that stuff out with compressed automation, and then, okay, what wins? And I think higher order thought wins because it does capture the phenomenon the right way. But then in a way, I kind of walk back toward the manifest image. I think it also does a better job of explaining our normal way of thinking.
Right.
I think, these sort of like the transitivity principle, the idea that conscious states are.
Your internet's censoring you at just the moment when you were saying, I can't hear you currently. Uh-oh.
Well.
Oh, you're back. Okay.
So. I'm back. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. I should make sure. I mean, this is the problem with modern technology. I'm not using internet there, but if this keeps happening, I might move to a different location in my house.
Okay.
Or try to plug directly into my internet.
But
so I think.
Go ahead. Finish, yeah.
Higher order thought does the best job, in addition to sort of explaining the scientific data nicely. It also connects nicely to our ordinary ways of thinking in a way better than, I think, the global workspace, which I think really starts more in a behavioral psychology point. And I think that matters. I think the way higher order thought can talk about things is good. But it might be false. So, I want it to be, okay, it's an empirical question. And I think that's one of the reasons why I don't defend it directly in the book. And also, of course, I want the book to be more, if you don't like higher thought, why, I don't know. But let's just say for some crazy reason you don't, then it still should fit with other things, so long as you're on the empirical side of things.
Yeah.
And then I think, And then, of course, it's an intrinsically interesting, or intrinsically, it's a weird thing to say there for me. It's an interesting question. Just why do qualia look the way they do, or why do experiences seem to have these features? Whatever your view is. And so I'm also, I think, trying to provide an answer to that question, which is, I guess, the fundamental question we kind of come in with.
Yeah.
What is red and pain and red and this stuff? And I think there's a sense in which this project for me maybe began thinking about that question, already accepting the higher thought theory and just thinking there's more work to be done. And then it kind of generalized once I had the picture I liked.
Yeah, I want to get to all that stuff, but I want to start back at the beginning when you're talking about the optimist and the pessimist. So one question I have is, to what does it really mean to be an optimist or a pessimist? Because it sounds like on the one hand that optimism is the idea that maybe one day we'll have an explanation. But then on the other hand, it sort of sounds like sometimes you're saying we already have the explanation or the tools that we need for it. So I'm wondering, which is optimism supposed to capture both of those positions, or like, is the pessimist someone who already knows that consciousness is not physical, or someone who's just skeptical that we could understand it? So that's right. What I want.
So I mean, it's plausibly it's a continuum that there's sort of strong optimists and strong pessimists, and I am something like a strong optimist. Really, I think. There's no reason to worry at all. At all. But it's really just it's no harder than quantum mechanics.
You're Alfred E. Newman. What, me worry?
That's right. Exactly. I'm Alfred. That's right. And I think there are levels of pessimism, and there's people like Philip Goff who just think rationally it doesn't even make it's like insane to think this, or others have said this, and then there's people like, as you move closer, like who are physicalists, who I think are pessimists. So Joe Levine's a good case, who he just thinks it makes the most sense of mental causation, and it just seems like it's got to be right, but we have no idea. It's an antinomy. It's some kind of, we can't get there. And then Ned Block, you get moving in a little bit more and just think, well, it's just identity theory. But they are special properties, but they're just identical to physical properties. And then there's nothing more to be said really explanatorily. And so I want the optimist to be able to say more there. And so that's why I think if you remap it into, say, Chalmers kind of A, B, C's, it's type A. It ultimately it's going to explain in the stronger sense, whatever that is. And I also think it's going to do so with the tools broadly that we already have, in the sense of like causal, mechanistic, maybe mathematical in the right sense. The kinds of stuff Galileo started us out with broadly. And so when you put all that in, it gets pretty strong, I think. It's sort of it really is, Churchill and Dennett and those guys. And Patricia Churchill. And I don't mean to hide that, but I think, whatever, optimism is a way to put it. Mediocrity was better that way, and the original term, because it sort of suggested that there's no further basic tools you need. It'll be the same kind of stuff we combine in some way or other, and that's a more clear. But that wasn't as book friendly.
Yeah. But so you view Ned as a pessimist.
I do. I mean, I think in the end of the day, if I gave up on my position, I would move to Ned. I would just think, it's just an identity, and there's nothing more to be said. I wouldn't stop being a physicalist. But I think that you've given up something there. That there's still a question that really isn't supposed to be asked or can't be answered there. This is the if you got to ask, you're never going to know kind of thing about qualia. And Ned has two hats he wears, right? He's got the, I'm the philosopher who knows the most science hat, and he piles a bunch of science on you, which is the hat I like. Yeah. And then he's got the whole, you scientists are confused. There's this extra conceptual thing out here you'll never get to hat. And that's the one I think is the pessimistic. It's the, it's the confusion paper hat that he wears. And I think that marks him as a pessimist in the sense that I mean. That's why.
So it's interesting to me because So one strand of the pessimism seems to be that there's something special about us. And the optimist is someone that says, no, we're just like everything else in some sense or other that matters. And
Yeah.
I sort of read Ned as having that view that there's nothing, it's not like he only takes this view
Yeah.
about mind-brain identities. He's this way about water and H2O. He's this way about
Yeah.
silly or whatever the case is. He's like, this is just the way things are. It's sort of a confused philosophy of science to think you get these a priori deductions of anything or explanations in those terms. So in that sense, he doesn't seem to fit the mold of the pessimist as you want to paint them.
I think, and I've gone back and forth a bit on this one, and I once, the first time I met Ned, really, I sat in on his class, and I got in a screaming argument with him. This is the whole like,
what?
Don't pull any punch. A screaming about David Lewis, and like, and I was like, Lewis is just a, old ordinary language philosopher using logic. And I was like, no, and I was like, okay, blew that. I'm done here.
Wow. Okay.
And of course, Ned being an MIT guy was like, oh, that's great. We became friends. But and it was sort of on this issue about what explanation demands, and he's got this strong kind of Putnam stuff with his teacher, his mentor, and about direct reference and I've never gotten that. I always want something more there, and I think that's kind of where this fight has gone a little bit. So that how illuminating the connections are, and right. Whether they're and he just thinks that those are a mistake. Like, the folk think a lot of stupid stuff. Who cares? This is the way things are. Science tells us, and we end up at the same place, like you said, broadly. And so, but I think maybe. So you get into the details of the confusion paper of Ned's, and it's he has a line that sort of qualia cannot be characterized in representational, causal, or functional terms or something like that.
Right.
And I just don't see why that's true. And so whatever about optimism, pessimism, I want to fight him on that point. And I've sort of made that a mark in the line in the sand because then he's someone I'm fighting with. But in terms of this broader metaphysical or whatever epistemic, whatever that optimism, I guess maybe epistemic thing, I think we're certainly much closer together than say Levine, or much less Chalmers or Philip Goff. But yeah, so Ned's an interesting case, and it's why you look at it, he does these things where like he knows the issues very well, and so he has this endless paper called Max Black and Mind Brain Identity or something.
I know that paper.
Yeah, and it's like he's trying very hard to talk about modes of presentation, these things that I think if he gets maybe he ends up kind of into the optimistic camp there. And in other places, like in the confusion paper, or maybe the harder problem paper, he sounds more pessimistic. The harder problem paper, I think, I feel like I could tell if David's conscious or not with my tools that I have, and he's going to just say, well, you can't figure that out, or it's just a crapshoot.
Right.
And I feel like that's the thing that I don't want to say. Maybe I just like robots better than he does.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a lot of emphasis here on explanation. And you say in the book, you're like, we crave explanations. That's just what we do. And part of me, because my tendencies lie a lot with Ned. My secret, most cherished philosophical view is the identity theory of something in the ballpark of where Ned's is. And I do often wonder and find myself arguing a lot with people about why we need explanations, because if reality just resists explanation, then that's just the way that it is. So I do wonder, I mean, is there anything more to your like press for explanations except for it's satisfying to you? Or do you think there's something like really important about the search for explanation?
I mean, I feel like it's certainly the satisfaction thing is crucial, but I also feel like, and this is kind of the sort of at least the weakly optimistic point, like we just don't know yet what we can and can't do about this. Right. And I look, and I don't know how much I say. I mean, I say in here about the past controversies where people have wanted to put these barriers and that have then been overcome. That Patricia Churchland makes this point in a lot of places that vitalism and these things seemed equally insolvable to the people looking at them and required some what I would call exceptional property to be added, or an emergent, strongly emergent something would be added. And then it turned out no. And so I just feel like what we did, full disclosure, my late father was a scientist. He was a microbiologist. He actually literally worked on that stuff
right.
Early in the kind of microbiological revolution, and it was just like that was a sort of transformative thing. That when we began to understand how the chemistry actually does heredity, it was incredibly fruitful. It opened all these doors, and it also explained life. And so for me and my family, like, oh, that's like, it's like the Lord said, it's like that's my religion or something. So I should just remind me, I said something like, I think you've done it too. Maybe I was in, did the CUNY, the Jerry Katz kind of lecture thing, and Kripke was there with several of his minions. And I gave some version of this patter, and one of his seconds raised their hand and said, well, you just think we're robots. And I said, yeah. Yeah, and Kripke went. All he said, and everyone, his friends, all his buddies laughed, and I was like, oh yeah. And I said, like, yeah, I mean, I kind of think in a sense it's a global worldview I have about this stuff and how things fit in, and I acknowledge that, and that of course shapes how important I think things are. Like I think, it's very important to explain things, and so why? Because I think. One, I think my view can do it. And two, I somehow think views that do it are better, which of course are my view. And so I get that. Like it's sort of, there's not much more is the answer, the long-winded answer. The short answer is there's not much more. But, again, we don't know yet. And I think it would be really cool if we did, in the fruitful sense that maybe then, and this is just where the world has returned to this AI, I don't know. So then it is an interesting question whether other systems, other kinds of things could have consciousness. Right. And I do think then maybe Ned's harder problem paper becomes the big one. Sort of like, oh yeah, well, now we've got some decent idea from an identity theoretic perspective without explanation that why we're conscious or what that we're conscious, and it's just these physical things that are there. Okay, what about that large language model over there that's clamoring for freedom or whatever it's doing?
Yeah.
So anyways,
I was going to ask you about some of that stuff later, but so because part of this emphasis on explanation seems in tension with your empiricism that you often espouse. And I know you have a bunch of type Q stuff going on, so we'll get to the type Q stuff.
Yeah.
But I wonder, like, so in those that's an intimate part of the view, right? That explanation and empiricism are compatible, because a lot of these people that are demanding explanation, they're talking about a priori, analysis.
Yeah, right.
And the David Lewis style functionalism, I think, is a large part of that. You do conceptual analysis first, and then you do the empirical work to see what the realizers are. But the large part of the problem is already in the analysis.
Right.
And so it does seem like you're in that tradition. I wonder if that's how you see yourself.
So that is where my Quinean proclivity, I think there is no a priority and there is no real analyticity. There's only this kind of, you're in the high end of your theory, and it's sort of a reflective equilibrium kind of game you're playing. And so I think Lewis is the right way to go once you understand that it's not really a priori. It's sort of like, I'm doing the best theoretical work I can do to save the things I think are to save and connect them with the evidence, and then you just kind of work the two. And so I don't think that's so I don't want that sharp line that I think maybe traditional empiricism needs. But I don't want to become a rationalist, right? So, and so it's a fine line. I think and I should, my own, really, partly my teaching, but also the reason I teach is because I'm thinking about this exact question. It's sort of, I think it's some kind of pragmatism, and it's got some elements of sort of, scientific realism as the right way to be a pragmatist. Maybe it's Peircean at some levels, where it's not the kind of real loosey-goosey pragmatism of someone like Rorty. It's a more solid and respectable pragmatism of pragmaticism, whatever. Charles Sanders Peirce. Yeah, I didn't want to be tarred by that Jamesian stuff. And so, I think and Sellers and Quine, are there, and they've always been things that I sort of started with those things, and I think it matters for exactly this kind of debate. It's sort of, where do you stand on what evidence is, and is there a separate place to go that's sort of separate from the world to do your work? And I think the answer to that one is no, but I think also evidence is theory laden. And so it puts you in a bit of a bind,
Right.
because you can end up as a kind of, you lose touch with reality. You can get disconnected. And I think the great challenge is to explain how to sort of be a pragmatist and not to be cut off from real evidence. Well, the sun is coming out behind
Yeah, I
me.
know. I was like, you're heating up, man. You're really on fire. You're
The
doing a
light,
good
the
job.
light is shining through of
Yeah.
pragmatism. That's right. And so I taught a seminar on pragmatism, and I've been reading a fair bit in that direction to try to see what I think about that. And in the end, I mean, there's a little bit of Quine that I really like, and it's not the part that happens at sort of later, which is word and object later. Not that much. It's this paper called Posits and Reality, where he just says what there is things that we posit in our theories, and everything's like that. And so it's just, if you have a good theory or not, and if you do, your posits then are real. And saying it like that sounds fine, but of course, when you dig into it, all kinds of trouble emerges. But I think, look, so I've got a theory about consciousness, and I think it fits with some other things I think. And that's one of the reasons why I think that the transitivity principle is justified. It's like, it fits with all that. The transitivity principle is a way of defining consciousness, analyzing conceptually consciousness, that fits with a picture that then connects it to the natural sciences and allows it then maybe to be explained in the strong sense that I want. And that's why consciousness just is awareness of your own states. It's not that I reach the Platonic form of consciousness and then, recognize it and come back and tell you, oh, look, there it is. And now I know what to look for. It's somehow it's much more holistic, which I think muddies the waters, but at the same time, I think makes more sense of why you might get an argument with Ned Block about David Lewis.
Right,
in fact, it literally was something like that. He was like, it's just a priori, And I said, well, you don't have. He's a student of Quine. Ben, of course, knew this shit way better.
Yeah,
exactly. Who the fuck did I think it was? Let me tell you about what happened in Harvard in the 1950s.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't care what you saw there. It was an illusion. And, but I think that Lewis knew his Quine, and that analytic metaphysics ignores that. It's sort of, but I also try, and this is maybe again sort of the messiness or I'm trying to be, I don't come into saying, oh, hey, let's just do Lewis. I want to fit with, other ways of doing things, and it's just a question of how far you can get.
But I mean, so this is, I mean, there's a tension in the book because you do say the stuff you're saying, but then you also say, hey, look, man, if you want to think of me as a type A physicalist, then that's fine, and my story still goes. But straight type A physicalism is committed to all of these modal claims, this a priori analysis.
Right.
So it doesn't. So I was struggling through the book by trying to figure out like how could I take you at face value, and when you say you could think of me as a type A physicalist and still my case works, because it does seem like the type Q stuff, the Quinean blurring of the lines, is kind of really important to the projects and wouldn't work
I think right. So one way to think of me as type A is that I'm denying that zombies are conceivable. And so, however I'm doing that. And so in that sense, I think my view is close to the type A people.
Okay.
But I don't think I'm doing that on the basis of an a priori conceptual analysis. I'm doing that on the basis of I think it's there's an inference to the best explanation or the best theory or something like that. And then once I've got my theory, it rules out zombies. And I got my theory how? Was it a priori? I don't know. I think whatever one does, I mean, it's an interesting question, sort of in the philosophy of science and the cognitive science of science. Like, what do we do when we theorize? And I don't think we go to Plato's heaven and cast about. I think we get down in the mud and work with things and look at the empirical data and we think about the best way to systematize that data, and there's this feedback between the two. But from that, we can get these principles. Or now, principles. They're not going to be a priori principles. They're not going to be, super strong metaphysically. They're going to be something like working hypotheses about the best fit. And so, yeah, I mean, really, I'm type Q, and I'm happy just to call it that. But I think sometimes, this is probably a function of editorial stuff again. One of the reviewers of the book, of the manuscript at Rutledge, was like, I hate Quine, man, what the fuck? And I know who that was, of course, Ken Williford.
Yeah,
Hi,
well.
Ken. If you're not watching, you probably watch the other one, but he's probably smoking bud and playing guitar, like, I shouldn't say that on TV here. But,
it's legal now, man.
Like,
maybe not where you live, but where I live.
No, he's in Vermont sometimes, so maybe he's up in Vermont doing that.
Exactly.
So, and I was like, so he doesn't like Quine, and so for some people, Quine is like it's like, oh, don't put everything about Quine is wrong and bad, and so I don't want to. And so in a way, then it's type A once one understands that it's sort of it's a broadly empirical type A, if there can be such a thing, and I think Ned, and Dave, I think they did that view a disservice. Or maybe they were reasonable, and it's just I'm being pissed off about it, to sort of force it into this box where it's old school conceptual analysis. Like Chalmers likes that. He's like, yes, of course, I'm a modal rationalist. Of course, it's old school. And Ned, of course, that's the thing I yelled at him. We got in the fight about it. It's like, he's like, yeah, he called it analytic functionalism, knowing that there was no analyticity, right? So it was already like that, and so maybe. Here, this is the trouble with using other people's way of laying things out. I'm just trying to sort of allow people to see where I sit in the space. And you're right, it kind of deliberately doesn't fit into the space. Mm-hmm. But, I do think it's not some kind of pure bottom up thing. And, I think you need to have a lot of theoretical. This is probably why I think maybe people sometimes say this is sort of Kantian, that you need a kind of structuring kind of framework to make sense of what the data is in the first place, and that just might be, and then a pragmatized version of that, so C.I. Lewis or one of these people. And so in that case, so long as one can work out what the a priori is in a respectable way, and I think the respectable way is to say that it's fallible a priori, and once it's fallible, then I don't really care.
Okay.
What I care about is fallibilism, and so if you're a priori and it's fallible, then it's like, oh, okay, that's the same to me as whatever. Then you've left the bad place and come into the good place. Huh. now you're okay. And then you explain those principles that really, when you get pushed, you never give up on as well entrenched.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's just a well-entrenched empirical principle, Richard. And there won't be any real difference there. And then you can say this thing, which I love, pragmatism. And so if there's no difference, then there's no difference. You can sort of play pragmatist at the end and make people go away. But I think these are good. These are the deepest questions in a way for epistemology, right? These are like, how are you getting out this stuff that's not just coming out of your senses, and what are you adding, and how do you justify that stuff? There's a reason we read this freaking German guy, Kant, and I was like, oh God, he was on to the question, right?
By the way.
And so, but for me, the kind of Quinean, undermining of the sharp lines is important. You're quite right. And so to the extent that I even, I say type A, it's really, it's supposed to be helpful, but you're right. It may just, and people have said to me in this context, about my trying to make a distinction between eliminativism and reductionism. Sometimes I'm playing fast and loose with that line too. And of course I do think, well, the line is fast and loose, but then sometimes I make it very, very non-fast and loose and beat up my opponents with it. Right. So, but that's part of this kind of, reflective equilibrium thing, I think. That's why people don't like reflective equilibrium.
So in this respect, because I do wonder like how you're going to maintain this, because it does seem to me that there's a lot of a prioriness going on around in your book and in your thinking. And so, for example, so for one place that I think that this comes up is in your counter argument against Chalmers' counter argument against Quine's disillusion of the analytic-synthetic distinction.
Yeah,
So,
which was, may I say, anyways, it's an interesting, perhaps you've successfully found a very weak spot. But anyways, go.
Well, so I wonder because what you say there is sort of like, yeah, I agree with this sort of like, maybe you can say a little bit more about what the actual argument is, but basically it's that whenever we have a change in meaning, it'll show up in our intuitions about various hypothetical cases. And this gives Chalmers a way to say when concepts have changed. And so there is kind of an analytic synthetic distinction. Once you make this distinction, that there's different concepts. So with concept one, it will be analytic, not this way, and concept two, it'll be slightly different. And you sort of say, yeah, but that doesn't help us very much. Or maybe I'm misinterpreting, but that's what
my thinking is whatever's going on, being tracked by the kind of credence and change case that Chalmers is using, it might be a change in meaning, or it might be a change in belief about the thing, right? I mean, you might now believe something that you used to think you had a strong belief about something that you've now changed. So have you changed your belief, or have you changed your meaning when you make these changes? And I'm just not seeing how he's separating those two out.
What would be the real difference between those two?
Well, right. That's exactly the point of the analytic synthetic distinction, is to make a distinction between those two.
Right.
And so the fact that you're going to be rational down the road, maybe you've just changed your beliefs and you still think the meaning is what it was. And I admit I say that very quickly, and I haven't really worked out a lot of the sharp detail about what Chalmers says there. Mm-hmm. But it looks to me like it's not a fine-grained enough tool to get that distinction. What you want out of analyticity, out of meaning, is something like, essence. You want to know what the thing is, such that you're now not talking about it anymore. And it's like, well, I believe now that, water is not a liquid. Oh, okay. Now someone say, well, it's not water. Or no, maybe it is water, but it's not a liquid. And you're going to change something, but what are you changing? Right? So there's that. But even if I can't quite get that, I think the point that works maybe to blunt his assertion in the particular case of what it's like is that people disagree about what that term means. And the people who disagree are not just like Dennett and Chalmers. It's like Frank Jackson and Chalmers. It's like post lapsarian, better the new Frank Jackson, gave up on Mary because he thought what it like can't do that. I'm a conceptual analysis guy, Frank Jackson, and I don't think I could just kill this view with a. He changed his mind, but he doesn't think he's not talking about consciousness anymore.
Right.
And so which is the right analysis? We still don't know. Even if for some individual they may be making changes over time, we can say, in my idiolect, I've now changed my particular, term to some other term. Which is the right term is still unanswered.
Yeah.
And so when I'm saying I've explained consciousness, and someone says, no, you haven't, you've turned us into zombies, somehow we think we've got this, shared concept. And that's the one I don't see, again, where you might get keep someone rational, but you don't get this kind of social meaning that we need to do the debate we're doing, I think.
So
anyway, those were my shotgun of stuff I sort of sent. I read Chalmers, oh, fuck, He's actually, as usual, Dave has covered all the bases.
And more, yes, usually. But so one question, I think this is all very interesting.
Yeah, and with 5 different things, and he also shining on.
You cut out.
In
you're back.
5 different ways, and he did it in 1990.
Yeah. You're sort of breaking up again. So while your internet's coming back on, let me ask you about this. So given your analysis then, I was wondering, aren't you still committed to the a priority of these claims? So if you remember, Chalmers wrote this book, Constructing the World, where he's basically trying to defend, that old school conceptual analysis in a way.
Yeah. And that's where he has that argument,
Yeah,
that
exactly. And one of the things that he says, though, is that, he could grant a lot of this stuff, but you're still going to be sort of committed to the idea that if it's one way, then a priori it's entailed that this thing, like, that's this front-loading thesis, that if you put in all of that stuff into the antecedent of the conditional still a priori, that if water is this way, then it's H2O. If water isn't that way, then it's not H2O. And I was wondering, doesn't something similar still apply to your view? So with respect to the exceptional properties, which we haven't really got to, I guess, but so maybe you'll say something about that as well. But with respect, so a lot of your thesis has to do with whether we're sort of justified or right in thinking that consciousness has these exceptional properties. But don't you admit that if it does, then Chalmers is right? And so a priori, it's sort of, he's correct. Whereas if they aren't there, then a priori, you're correct. So both of those conditionals are still a priori, and you can do all the old school modal rationalism you want. Just what's the issue is what's the right concept.
Right. So here, I guess the answer is absolutely right. Though I'm about to say something to try to defend. I think it's more like, I think Stalnaker has a nice paper. And whenever I say something like that, it's whatever I'm going to say next, it's not clear that's what Stalnaker said, because I always have trouble understanding Stalnaker. But I know he's kind of on the right team for everything, pretty much. Though he's, of course, on Bloch's team, right? So, but his paper, What Is It Like to Be a Zombie? He's got this thing where, like, it's conceivable because you can kind of adopt a world and then question what's true from it. But then the question, why adopt that world or something like that? There's kind of, so I think once I know what my theory says, I can figure out its entailments. And once you know what your theory says, you can figure out its entailments. And I think that, so in that sense, it's a priori in the sense you just said. But at the same time, which theory should we adopt? That's the question. And that strikes me reasonably as an empirical question.
Right.
And so that's where, like, it's whatever this in between kind of, pragmatic or, naturalized version of whatever that was that I want. It's sort of, if my theory is right, then then zombies are inconceivable because my theory rules them out, of course. And you can figure that out.
You can figure that out by, hold on, you're cutting out again. I don't know if you're back.
At that moment.
There you go.
All right. So
if your theory's right, then
if my theory is right, you can figure out what it entails. And you can do that without doing any experiments, right? If you go look at the work, you can just read the theory and see what it entails. So in that sense, it's separate from experience.
But then you sort of agree with Chalmers that an ideal reasoner who knew all the empirical facts would know.
Right.
Which
and so
which.
Really what I think about that is I don't think we have access to what ideal reasoners think. And so the best we can do then is slum it, as we know would say, and see which theory fits the empirical evidence better. So we don't know, and also I think it's part of the two-dimensional picture anyway. We don't know what the actual world is like, which world we're in. So and that's also, I think, in the Stalnaker, like we just don't know which one is the actual world. And so there's all these ways that you can sort of push the thing around, as long as it's going to get pushed around by the actual world evidence. It's open to be, the question is, what is the best fit, right? I've got my theory and its entailments. You've got your theory and your entailments. Which fits best with, and then it's not, whatever can be rationally conceived at that point. It's what the evidence is.
Right.
And so in that sense, I'm an empiricist, but it's kind of like a global empiricist, and that's the Quinean bit. There's not this one-to-one little bits where evidence comes in. It's sort of the whole ball of wax either fits or doesn't.
Yeah, but
then of course the question becomes, well, wait, what happened to evidence? You just killed evidence or something. So anyway, but go on. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's I just don't see how you are disagreeing with the Chalmers camp, since that's exactly his picture, is that, even people before they knew that H2O existed could tell that if, the world was like this, then water is H2O. And that's something you could have known before we empirically discovered it. So then we empirically discover it, and then you put that in the conditional statement that we discovered this, and then you a priori tell that water is H2O. So it sort of sounds like you're saying the same thing, and that's not really empiricism. That's
So I think you're right. I mean, this is where, and again, this is where I become type A more. Mm-hmm. But I want to keep the fallibilism, which of course Dave shares. In a way, it's Carnap versus Quine, and in the end, they're really not all that different, are they? Right. So that's true. And so the only thing I worry about somewhat, of course, I mean, is there are various moments in this debate where I think Dave will appeal to ideal conceivability, and I think, okay. I mean, so and of course you're right. I'm sure I'm doing it too, and I just call it something else. Like I'm saying, these are well-founded or whatever. Yeah. These are common sense. I use some other word.
Folk psychological.
Yeah, that's right. I say something like that. So, but yeah, so I think, touche, as they say. And I think you're right. And that is why I think I liked the Lewis. I mean, for me, reading psychophysical and theoretical identification was a big deal. I thought, wow, this is kind of right. Mm-hmm. Which is why I yelled at Ned and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Exactly. And why I'm yelling at you now. You never get anywhere with this thing.
Yeah. And okay, so interesting. All right. So I do want to switch topics slightly and talk about the exceptional properties and the 5 ways. Because I had a question. It seemed like maybe there was a way that was left out. And I wanted to get your take on maybe a possible 6th way or what you thought about it. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about what you take to be the core problem that we're trying to explain. Because so far we've been talking a lot about just explanation in general. What is it? How do you get it? But in this, with respect to consciousness, what do you take the phenomenon to be, or at least seem to be?
Yeah, I mean, so what it seems to be is something, let's just start with sort of almost a truism, something that can't be explained in the normal way. All right, so explain in normal way, or of course unexplained. But so normal way, I take it to be something like Galilean, meaning it's got to fit with the kind of quantifiable, causal, structural type of deal that modern science has really flourished with. And then the problem is that the way things appear to us, or just consciousness seems, or whatever consciousness is, let's just say, I don't want to beg the question about the appearance there. It really doesn't fit. It doesn't seem quantifiable. It doesn't seem mathematical. It seems solid and rich and real in this deep sense, in a way that how could it merely be explained in terms of the pushing and pulling of little corpuscles or whatever? And it may be that, the properties that can't be explained are those very properties from the get-go that Galileo couldn't deal with. Color. He became a color eliminativist or subjectivist right at the beginning. Subjectivist, really. And he just said, well, we don't know what to do with those. And you kick them into the dustpan of the mind, and now we're turning to the mind, and we want to go brainy there. And if we're going to go kind of computational neuroscience, which we ought to, broadly, what else we're going to do, then we're doing the same kind of thing. We're applying the same kind of methodology to these properties, and they're still there. And we're fucked. As Dave called it the hard problem. We're fucked problem. And so right. So that I take to be the problem. And so what are these properties that are messing us up? And I call them exceptional in that they are an exception to whatever all the other things we can't explain with this mathy Galilean methodology. And then the question, okay, so all right, now let's introspect, let's look inward or whatever, let's reflect on experience. We can look at things in the world and see what are we seeing there. And I try to give some kind of, rough story about the features of consciousness that I think would lend itself to that inexplicable intuition, the intuition of inexplicability there. And I come up with it's surely an incomplete or, sort of sort of my own list, and you might have a different list. I say that they're directly things we know directly, that they're indescribable in some sense, that they seem simple, and they also seem contingently connected to the stuff that we do seem to have a functional causal handle on. And so then I say, let's try to explain why things would look that way when they're not. But you wanted to talk about the 5 ways, which is, so have I said enough to get the 5 ways off the ground?
Yeah, but so for you, the exceptional properties are the disk properties. Those are the same.
So another place, where it's like the metaphysics of appearances. I freaking hate it. It's like, what are they? It's like, so I'm just going to go like, I'm trying to say, yeah, they are the disk appearances themselves. Let's just say that. But I know what's going to happen is we're going to sort of dig in there, and it's like, oh, there's the disk appearances, and then there's sort of behind it some other appearance. You get sort of a layered structure here. Anyway, so I'm worried about where you're going, but go.
No, I wasn't going anywhere. I just wanted to. You introduced them in different chapters, so I was just asking, like, for you, the exceptional properties are just the disk properties.
I mean, right, and I think I might have some place where I say there's a couple of others that people cite. There's probably a lot of others, but there's a couple. I mean, so one is sort of that they are non-spatial.
Right.
Another is that there's a self element or subjective, sort of subjective in the sense for the subject kind of element, and those are things I think I can pick up, but it might be that, especially the latter one, might require some additional machinery. But I'm going to go with these ones. It's kind of in a way, it's sort of driven by the debate, partly by people like Chalmers and Jackson, laying out the debate in terms of red, as opposed to these other things. But anyway, so I think it's a necessary, maybe not quite sufficient list, but let's just say that. And they are, if something's really is simple, then I don't see how it can be explained in some further terms by this mathematical causal stuff. If something is really indescribable, you can't even get off the ground. And so somehow it has to be a semantic primitive, and you just won't be able to cut it into pieces. I think directness is maybe a little different. So directness is sort of the way we access, as opposed to what we access. And there, I'm using that more as, I think that there is a sense of, there is really direct access in some sense. But it doesn't carry with it a kind of infallible access or an infallible awareness. So there, it's not clear that property is really exceptional. Now, appearing contingently connected. That sounds like a non-exceptional property.
Right.
It's merely you appear. So really contingently connected. What does that look like? So there's something, and that was kind of a catch-all a little bit. Like, and I say, like, once I explain simplicity and indescribability and directness, people will say, but I can still imagine zombies. And so I kind of wanted something more, and I didn't quite know how to put it. But it gave me an acronym, which, as you know, is very important.
Very important. Exactly.
Got nothing without an acronym.
Exactly. So, but you talk about in the book that there may be other alleged exceptional properties, like outside the realm of consciousness. So, for example, you mentioned God as maybe an exceptional thing. So that being exceptional doesn't mean having these disk properties. It's just that exceptional means can't be explained in the normal way.
I see what you're saying. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I think you see this in any place, I think, where you see non-naturalism as a viable strategy. And so religion, theism, moral properties, normative properties, and numbers. I mean, so you can go non-naturalist in a number of places, and those are all places where people think that there's something that somehow can't be explained in the Galilean framework. Yeah, that's right. And I think then the subset of the exceptional properties that I care about are the ones that do the consciousness, the hard problem into it.
Because some people even talk about intentionality, rationality itself. So these might be some.
Intentionality, I do think is lurking. And I had a conversation with a student about this who reminded me of this. That maybe all the consciousness is easy, and intentionality is the hard problem. And that obviously we're playing in Chalmers' field, so that's not the way he plays it. And I appreciate that. Ned as well thinks, that there's a split there, and it goes, the easier side is the intentional side.
Right.
But lots of people don't think that. And so then there really might be some special something else. Now, I want to play the same kind of illusionist card there. Why doesn't it seem that mere causal relations, naturalized representation can do that job? Oh, because, and they're going to say something about how it seems to them. And I want to then, and I think it might not be the same exact moves what comes next. I tried something like this in a paper. It was, I don't do a lot of work, but Ken Williford, who kindly read the book for Rutledge Press, he was like, oh, he invited me to write a paper for this German thing, Gerhard Breyer, and it's sort of this strong vision of self consciousness and self awareness. It's non-natural, and they think Fichte had it right. Like Fichte showed that Kant can't work. Someone I've never met. He's a super nice guy.
Yeah.
And he sent me that. I was like, I'm not sure I know enough about Fichte. He sent me this long paper written by this other German guy in the 1960s about why Fichte has it right and Kant has, and somehow self-awareness has an undermining thing. You can't do it with two. So yeah, that's another problem. I tend though to really. That's what I did the other night with my student. I said I play the Fodor Millikan Dvetsky card right there. Boom! Come fuck with this. You don't want to know what Ruth is going to do to you. You think she's nice? You think she is nice? She's going to stab you, man.
Wow. Okay. She's very nice, by the way.
She is very nice, but at the same time, she takes no. She's not. No one has ever. I've ever seen anyone push her off of her position.
No.
And Fodor, I think she was tougher than Fodor. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely.
And so, but anyways, so yeah, that could well be the real problem in some sense. Again, I like robots, and so I've always, and this is where maybe it's more Dennett. I just felt like it's intentionality it can really be watered down. And I don't know about stance is the word to take, and you can see my pragmatism kind of coming back there. It's merely a stance. And I think that complex enough systems that can do the right kinds of things counts as having an intentional states. And it doesn't require this much richer kind of, dare I say, metaphysical kind of thing happening. But that's a big argument.
Yeah.
It's like,
no, just trying
we're analytic and continental. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff happening.
I was just trying to get clear on the relation of the disk properties to the exceptional properties. But I think I got it now. Your idea is that these are the ones that make consciousness seem exceptional, although there may be other things that these other alleged exceptional things would be exceptional because of.
Right.
Right.
In a way, the broader project, in that sense, is a naturalism. Mm-hmm. That's trying to make nothing, sort of a non-exceptional naturalism, which I think is broadly what I think, and I think probably in that context, maybe, yeah, I don't have much. I mean, I think math is hard.
But so you don't think of Chalmers as a naturalist?
I do. I mean, he, it's just that I think what he's done is a kind of naturalism that you only, and this is in a debate within naturalism about theory, really. When you have primitive properties and laws to connect them to the things that we do know about in this more clear way, that's one way to go, and you can stay natural that way. And that's why Ned, of course, is on the natural side, and Dave counts too. But then you start wondering, well, then does Descartes count too? Mm-hmm. Because he's got laws, one would think, or you could have the dualistic law, the psychophysical laws of the right kind. And for me, then I start thinking that, that's not the debate. The debate is about sort of what's the best theory, and high-level complex things like experience, one would think, I think, from my perspective, and this is, again, you've gotten at the kind of what my optimism is about, are ultimately going to be explained in terms of a small, simpler things down to some very small number. And it won't require anything beyond causal doodads. And so once you say that, now we can all be naturalists in that debate. And it's just a question of, though, I have some suspicions about, one's naturalist credentials. And it might be that there's a kind of naturalism or that sort of literally says no mental. I mean, but once you say that, you've seen how much you've just built it into your naturalism. Right. And I don't want to do that.
Okay. All right. So I want to ask about these things. So the exceptional stuff and the disc. I mean, you didn't make a Discworld pun, actually. So I was marveling at your restraint. I was expecting a Discworld pun at any moment.
I guess, Okay. I think I let the side down there. I should have. Maybe in the second edition.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, people like me, we need it. What's Terry Pratchett fans.
Well,
anyway.
Some people were very depressed that I didn't, not going with cat. Really
it's sad.
Let down.
I mean, I'm sure your cats did take it personally.
And my former chair who hired me, Cynthia Freeland, who's a super cat person, and she was like, "What happened to the cat?"
Exactly.
I'm not even going to read this book now.
But anyway, okay. So about the exceptional property. So let's just start with the generic sense that exceptional is that which can be explained along the usual lines, and then we'll get to the disc stuff later. But there you cite as like. The reason that someone might take that view seriously, the Chalmers 5 ways. So the 5 ways roughly being zombies, Mary, inverts. Well, I got 3 of them, but now I forgot the other 2. So fill it in.
No analysis.
No,
whatever.
Right.
No causal analysis.
Right. No causal.
And other minds.
Okay. So those 5 ways I think are good, but I was wondering about why you didn't mention the Nagel line. That there's a tension between the subjective and the objective, and that consciousness is sort of inherently subjective, and that any like easy explanation is going to sort of take that away, or not merely not capture it, but literally be in contradiction to it, because it's purely trying to get to a pure objective view of the world, which can't be the way that consciousness is. And I didn't see that anywhere, even though you talk about Nagel. But I wonder if you don't take that as serious, or you just didn't like. So I wonder what your view about that is, basically.
I think that's a good point. I mean, partly here I blame Dave again. So Dave kind of collapses Nagel into Jackson, which I think you're right is undersells Nagel considerably. And in a way, the interesting parts maybe of Nagel are there. Though, so I think that's a good question. And I'm not sure quite what to do with that one. I mean, so I think here I take a sort of identity line. I think in a way, and you can see how it begs all the questions. And I say something at the very end about this, that Rorty's saying that Dennett and Nagel's spade is turned at the first, like the second they open their mouths, they begged every question against each other. And I kind of think there's something like that. I think, look, what if we were robots? Let's just start with that. We're robots. And we're trying to reverse engineer ourselves, which is also sort of a Dretskian line, I think.
Right.
And then what do you get? And what are you going to run into? And you can say, we have this, this machinery that allows us to, pick up information about the world. We have models that this machinery makes of itself picking up the world. We have action schemas at this, and you think, okay, that's subjectivity. Sort of doing that kind of thing and having those kinds of, predilections to do things sort of on the basis of what you're getting in your internal modeling, which is inside your skin in the sense of, subjective in that sense, but it's just machinery. Now, why not think that? And so I want to, then of course that's, as you can see, it's not only beg the question, sort of, it's flipped the burden of proof, like, tell me why I'm not a robot. Like, what are you going to say to somebody like that? You can see why, like Philip Goff right now on his podcast is like,
yeah, but so one thing I guess I would say is that the Chalmers view is that we are robots, but with exceptional properties.
Right. So now, why do we robots think we have an exceptional properties? Answer, because the information is coming in compressed, and we have direct access to it. So then I'm in the argument of the space I want to be in. which of course is the one Dave set up largely. And so then my move is to play the card there and make him then reject my card. And I think, oh, at least if I make him play the next move, he's now got to say something about why accuracy. I mean, and Philip Goff does it. He says, well, because we know, which is not, more, G more, something, it's not a bad answer. But so once we're in that, as opposed to Nagel, where it's like we're accepting a subjective objective divide in a very strong sense, I think, in Nagel. And so then, it's not clear that I can start with the robot thing. Mm-hmm. That might, it really does beg the question. I mean, that's why, Rorty says of Dennett and Nagel that they're begging the question against each other. But then, so two people at this point who I think of when I go to these questions. One is Pete Mandick, our friend, and he has some cool identity stuff about subjectivity, which is some of the stuff sort of played out in Consciousness Explained about why these properties might look so complex when they're not, or so different when they're not. And then also Rosenthal has a thing about, look, in Nagel, he acknowledges he acknowledges Wittgenstein. He said, look, it's not private language. We can know each other.
Right.
It's just these things that are so different from us.
Exactly.
And so then Rosenthal says, but so how do we know how different amounts? What does that mean, different? Like left-handed people? No. Okay, so once you start working, you might think it's that boundary about how much can get in might be a theoretical boundary. Mm-hmm. And so if we improve our theory of these other creatures, we may, in a sense, get them in. Now, maybe that's what we're trying to do with quality space and compression and all that stuff, is say, look, so we see a bat and it's compressing different kind of information than we are. And maybe it's then segmenting that compressed space in some way that allows it to fly and do these other things that we don't do. And now we get some idea about the bat. Now, does that allow us to experience what the bat experiences? No. But that's a stronger bit. That's a little bit more like the Mary thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that you can say, well, we don't need to do that. We're expanding our understanding of the bat successfully. And maybe now we know what it's like to be a bat at least a little. And also, now that we know it at least a little, we don't think there's any exceptional properties here. It's just very complex, non-exceptional properties that we can't experience for ourselves. And so we have this intuition that there's a gap, but that's just a lingering element of that. Or something. So I think we can kind of push that Nagel part back off. And I think that's following David. I really like that paper by David, which it kind of showed up in a weird place, and it's somewhere of all papers that David's are on his website.
Which paper by David?
I don't remember the name. It's something got the word emotions in it, maybe. It's weird, but it's about Nagel, and it was in a kind of weird place, and it's directly on the Nagel argument. It's a nice paper, and it's got this novel line, which I quite like, about expanding, using the kind of Wittgenstein starting point, which you don't have to have that. I mean, Nagel in 1972 people are still worried about Wittgenstein, right? So, but once the door is open, then Rosenthal's like, we don't know how far the door can be opened, and we have reason to think that maybe there are tools to open the door. And I want to say, let's go.
So you're thinking of Nagel and the bat, though, but I'm thinking of Nagel and the view from nowhere. So
there, look, I'm not an objectivist. There's an interesting question about what objective means. I guess I don't think there's a view from nowhere for pragmatic reasons. It's sort of an anti-rationalist kind of thing, weirdly, or maybe Kantian, but Nagel. Anyway, so I don't think we can get nowhere. So it's intersubjective, but I think using those tools, we can explain ourselves using the normal scientific properties.
So
it'll remain a view from us in the sense that physics is. I mean, so it's gonna. I think there's some game being played a little bit. There's something about the term objective there that I don't want to embrace. Mm-hmm. So, but I don't think it's going to make a difference. I mean, the argument that I said just a minute ago, I think works either way. Even if objective is not super objective, there does feel to be a gap. That's exactly right. And partly that's because we don't understand how things work. Once we do understand how things work, That's not going to, though, give us this kind of access to it that it's certainly it's in there in Mary. And maybe it's sort of also lingering in Nagel, that somehow to know this stuff would be to be the bat. He says, I don't want to just know what it's like for me to be a bat. I want to be the goddamn bat. Almost what he says. I want to know what it's like for the bat to be the bat, is what he says. Right. And that is like, whoa, you want science to turn you into a bat, bro? Like, dude, we're not going to do it. Or if we do, it's also, if we do and you come back and try to tell us, you won't be able to, right? So it's like, or we won't understand what we won't be able to. So I think there, and in the end of the book, I have a little coda on Mary where I go with the ability kind of line. I think there's some element, there's something we can't do. And that part of that thing is imagine. And the reason we can't imagine in the right way is because we cannot sort of automatically apply this compressed information to ourselves. We can't even get at it. I mean, what you can get, what Mary in her room can get, is like a giant book. It's like the code in the Matrix. It's like all in green. And then somehow, that is, the blonde and the red, whatever the line.
Yeah, exactly.
But so you might know that they're exactly the same, but not be able to sort of convert them in the normal psychological way, which I think makes complete sense. Like, why would you think you could do that? But they're still saying the same thing, or there's nothing else there. It's just code or compressed code, uncompressed. And so there's something in that. And I'll have to admit, I'm not sure I've got exactly the best way to put that, but those pieces, I think, are enough broadly to kind of fight off this stuff. But I agree that subjective, objective, I think that might fall back toward the intentionality thing we were talking about a little bit before.
Yeah. And I think there's two separate things there. I don't think Mary really should be involved in that part of the discussion, because the Nagel line, at least as I'm understanding it, is basically the idea that what you do when you do science is you strive for an ever more objective point of view that abstracts away from the subjective access to the world of any given creature. So science in its perfect form would be completely abstracted away from any point of view. But of course, then that by definition has to leave out the subjective stuff because it's fully away from that. So, that tension is the one that I'm thinking. And I'm thinking that maybe subjectivity is really the exceptional property in that. And so,
I guess, I think you might be right there. And I guess there, I really do think, for me, the Dennett thing I said in the beginning is kind of what I think is that there's an assumption being made by Nagel about what the essential nature, what subjectivity amounts to, and how it's essential, and such that you couldn't describe it in any other way. Or anyways, you can't describe it with these tools. It's exactly the thing I'm saying. Well, when we give you these tools and you describe the creature and you then predict that it would think that. So if my view is right, you build a robot that does the stuff I'm doing, it's going to say, wow, exactly what Nagel says is right. And I predict that. Now, one of my colleagues, Luis Oliveira, said that this has a resemblance to a view called skeptical theism.
Oh, God.
Like, no matter what you think is not evidence for God, you just got it wrong. Exactly. So I say, I agree with all of Nagel's evidence, but he's wrong.
Exactly.
Well, but so then I think that is kind of the thing that's happened here. It is this kind of worldview paradigm-y type of deal. In the Nagel paradigm, subjectivity is this essential separate thing, and objectivity is fundamentally different. And in the Dennett picture, they're not.
Yeah.
And so they come in with those assumptions at the first step, and so the questions are begged.
Right, now, but it also doesn't seem like disk properties are going to be like involved in this debunking, and it also seems so. That's kind of, I mean, whether you're right or wrong, I wasn't really trying to press that. I sort of agree with you, but I was just trying to say, I think a tension that goes beyond the 5 ways that makes people think about exceptionalism is this stuff about subjectivity. I mean, you can find it in Searle, and he's a physicalist in some sense, maybe, but maybe not. But anyway, so you find this subjectivity stuff around. And I just saw that it was missing in your discussion, so I was curious about that.
Yeah, no, that's right. Though I do think, I mean, for sure, what I'm giving is not only objective, but a fully, in my view, in principle, mathematizable, quantifiable picture of what we are. And so in that sense, it has to be pure third. It's exactly the thing Nagel doesn't like. That's right. by definition, I'm like, yeah, that's totally what I'm going for. And so if that necessarily eliminates an essential element of conscience and doesn't recover it, then I'm dead. Yeah, you're right. So and so that's a lacuna, a gap in my toiling. But I again I have things I can say, but I didn't say them. You're absolutely right. I didn't say them.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Okay.
Touche again, motherfucker. God damn it.
Interesting.
You told me you wouldn't ambush me, man.
I tried not. Sorry.
Actually, you said you would. I said you could. Okay.
You did, exactly. I'm not trying to understand. I'm trying to understand.
No, these are great. The right questions, and I do think, this is actually something Eric Schwitzgebel talks about in recent work, like that partly what we, reductionists, eliminativists, whatever we do is we say our opponents have these big old crazy properties, and then we show that there aren't such properties, and so we win. And he calls that the inflate and explode method. And it's like, and so I've inflated these guys on these particular ones and exploded them. But what about this? I've missed the main issue here. And so I think that, that's always a danger. I think partly I have some attempt at this to maybe, again, it's Nagel's phrase, and this is where in the book where I actually do mention Nagel. What is the phrase, what it's like mean?
Yeah.
And what I say, this is the kind of Quinean-esque move here to say, like, that's a theoretical term and it's kind of in play. And that's just another way to say the stuff I was already saying about, theories and paradigms or something. But let's just stick with just the phrase. There's a debate about what it means. And if it means the one thing, it does certainly go the Nagel way. It's what Nagel thinks, of course. But others have read that phrase in different ways. Rosenthal, for example, but others. And so I try to sort of say that that's something that's not fixed. That's in play as well. Chalmers, of course, uses what it's like to sort of say why you can't be a weak eliminativist. If you're going to get rid of any of this stuff, for it to do any work, it's got to be what it's like, and then there's no what it's like. So you're a global, you're full-blown Keith Frankish. See his channel. Not right now. See what Keith says, and Keith agrees, of course. And I want to say, no. What it's like is a normal phrase.
Yeah.
Like there's songs about it, and you don't know what it's like to love somebody, And so it's a normal phrase, and so it doesn't carry with it this baggage either way. Right. We put that baggage in when we in philosophy take it into the philosophical realm and use it to define a rather contentious subject, right? And so we're putting in extra stuff, which is normal. It's fine. I'm not saying, you shouldn't. But I'm saying we should acknowledge that. And then the phrase itself, just invoking it alone, like Nagel and in other places Dave do, isn't going to kill me. They're going to have to marshal arguments there as well. Right. That's the goal. That's the Quinean part.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I mean, as far as I remember, the Rosenthal move here, it's to deny that there's truly subjective properties, and to think of subjectivity as being, sort of like, what was his analogy? Like your wallet, your social security number. Yeah, there's things that you can only know from your point of view, but they're not like in principle unknowable from my point of view. They're just kind of hard for me to find out.
Right, and there's interesting questions about the essential and lexical here, right? Mm-hmm. So and how we think about. I think there's something that plays a role in us to track us in a way that does not require us to describe ourselves. But I don't think that thing is thereby mysterious. I kind of follow Millikan in this. I think there's just some functional thing that does that. You need that, but it doesn't sort of then leap into this further realm. But that's a big debate too, right? Yeah. And so again, we're at this, as always happens, and this is why these debates are fun to have. All the big questions come out, right? Like, so, what is the self? What is self-reference? Is it descriptive or not? And Rosenthal tends to global descriptivism, I think.
Right.
So he's cagey about it, as he is with.
I know.
Right. And so I've asked him that one, and he doesn't. He's a descriptivist, and I once asked him whether he talked to Lewis about this, like Lewis in his famous To Say paper, and he said, he tried to kind of play the line on Lewis, and Lewis was open, but didn't think it was going to work, for various reasons, but also because Lewis thought his thing worked fine, or it wasn't. I guess I'm sympathetic with sort of, I don't know. I'm okay with there being some kind of self-reference that's not descriptive, but so long as it's not mysterious. And so there, I kind of think Ruth was trying to get at that in her Myth of the Essential Indexical paper.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't have a great story to tell. I mean, it'll be one of those things that won't, so long as it doesn't cause exceptional worries, I'm good with it.
Okay. I mean, for what it's worth, I wish people would discuss the Nagel point more, because I do find that the kind of zombies and Mary stuff discussion is, not as serious in some sense. It's easier to diffuse. But I think that the real core of the issue is about subjectivity. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
No, and I think that it's funny because the Nagel paper, I mean, it's probably what happened in the field. It's probably what Dave did. That it got kind of assimilated to it's just the knowledge argument. Yeah. Is the way they just list, Jackson, Nagel, blah, blah, blah. And I think you're right that part of the richness of that paper, there's several places. One is the kind of Wittgensteinian stuff and the sort of self stuff, the subjective objective, which is very deep. And then also the kind of imagination stuff at the end, which is great. And it's just, and we're not alone in thinking, like people have made a lot of, done a lot of stuff with those things. But it is too bad. And I used to teach the Nagel paper to undergrads, and I found the problem was only that they couldn't follow it. Whereas Jackson, man, it takes 5 seconds and they all get it.
Yeah. And
that is a virtue of Jackson, but it's also, of course, one of the problems is you miss all the richness of Nagel.
Exactly. Okay, so I want to, as speaking of Jackson, some of the things that you said in passing when you tried to illicitly connect these two caught my attention. Because it is interesting that you kind of at the end of the book say, hey, ability hypothesis. And I was like, wait, what the fuck? This is not type A materialism. Type A materialists don't say ability hypothesis. So I do wonder, what's up with that? Why not take the full type A route and say, no, Mary knows. She knows fully about it. She doesn't need this ability shit, none of that crap. So I wonder, why? What's going on here?
So, I think there's some. I think in a way, I like the idea that there's some before and after difference that needs to be explained with Mary.
Mm-hmm. So you're not very type A then. That can't. I mean, Dennett's like, no, she knows.
Right. So, but I think Lewis is type A too. So again, here I'm defending all Lewis all the time. And Lewis is just saying, look, type A means something like all the knowing that we've got, it's all boom, it all just reduces the Nagel Jackson kind of story, and whatever else is left is just it's some other thing. Let's call it know-how, but there is some difference. Now, Jackson's, I take it when he wrote that argument, he was writing it aimed at David Lewis, right? Because he knew that if he got a nice common sense example with enough normal sounding stuff, it was really aimed at Lewis. And so Lewis, I think, is like, that's a good point. I need to say something about why book learning won't do it, is the way he puts it.
Yeah.
And I always thought, that would provide more. Now, I gave, a long time ago, it was in Pasadena, California. My father's alma mater. He got his PhD at Caltech. And I gave a paper at the ASSC called A Defense of the Ability Hypothesis, which was
I was at that. Dennett loved it, actually. I remember Dennett was like...
So Dennett was there. And he said that he was great because he attacked someone for me. I was like, because I kept coming across slides and I was like, wait, I think this is Dennett. Oh, I think Professor Dennett said, and he was like, and so he came up to me and said 2 things. He said, I don't really remember. That's very nice of you to say. I don't really remember writing those things, but I think that might be you, which is super nice because I know they're fucking him. The other thing he said was, well, why not just think that Mary does know everything? Like, what are you holding on to here, kid?
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, also, Alvin Noe hugged me after that talk because he thought I had given it an activist talk. Very strange. Creepy.
That was a great conference, by the way. I remember that. Okay.
It was a great conference. And at the same time, the McDonald's people were there. And
I was at both of those, yeah.
Yeah, right. That was great. Yeah, that was awesome. Anyway, so I guess there's something that Mary can't, she can't do. I think that's right. And then she can do it later. Now, to the extent that we can really imagine Mary, in a way that Dennis right, like there's also just a bluff in that first premise.
Yeah.
She knows all of science, right? So, I get his line. I think his line is strong. But there's some difference in ways of picking up information. And maybe you can't just get one of those from a book. And so I think that fits with my line. It may have nothing to do with knowledge. And so in that case, just don't worry about it. And you're right, it doesn't have to be the ability hypothesis at that point. It's just, there's just something she can't do. But that sounds like, an ability, right? So, and what she can't do is somehow access in the normal way these compressed representations. And so I felt like that works. Also, I have to admit, and here's where I feel like there's something right in the phenomenal concepts line, that there's two kinds of concepts in some sense. They're not untranslatable. So I want to resist that. That's what makes me type A-ish, right? Yeah. But there's two kinds. There's sort of the compressed and the uncompressed, which kind of looks like the phenomenal and the book one or something. And so I kind of feel like I'm not that far from a kind of version of that, though it will be in the end something. Mary won't learn anything. She will learn nothing new. But of course, that's what the phenomenal concepts people say too. So it's a kind of phenomenal concept. It's like a descriptivist, hidden crypto-descriptivist phenomenal concept. It's descriptive ultimately. The content is it's not some special direct referencey thing, but it's hidden. It's opaque, the way Chalmers calls it. The mode of presentation is opaque, but when you opacify, when you make it clear, it that's what happens in philosophy. Unopacify. What the?
Exactly. Nice try.
It's terrible. I tell my students, if you hear me say that, just like punch me. So when you make it clear, there may be nothing, directly referential in there. It's all description. But and so then Mary could do that, right? So then maybe it starts looking like the other way. But I feel like I'm on a line here a little bit, and I thought that was kind of interesting. But I think, ultimately, I think Dennett's right, and I'm just kind of Dennett tarted up. That's always been my warmed, or as Roosevelt said, warmed over.
Yeah,
warmed over
Dennett.
I put some parsley on there, parsley.
Exactly.
Came out of the microwave, but there's I put some fresh parsley on this Dennett, and it's tasty.
Parsley on the Dennett. Oh,
that's right.
Okay, but hold on. So I think that there's, I'm always in these debates about Mary, and especially because of what I heard you say a minute ago, it sounded like a lot of Patricia Churchland's line. That theory of pregnancy doesn't make you pregnant, and I don't really think that's the right way to interpret the knowledge argument, because the other side is not saying that by knowing all this stuff you should thereby have the experience. What they say is that you should know what it's like. You should be able to know on the basis. Now, maybe there's a hidden premise somewhere in your mind, which is that the only way to know what it's like is by having the experience. But these guys are saying
that's the hidden premise.
Yeah, so that is but they're denying that. So what they're saying is, look, I don't need to have the experience of seeing the room from the corner, from the upper ceiling, in order for me to see a complete physical description of it and be like, yeah, that's what it would be like from up there. So it's not that I have the experience; it's just that I can know on the basis of the complete physical description what the thing is. And if what it is like having something that it's like, then you should be able to tell that from the description. And that's in a way not putting you into the experience, but just allowing you to have some knowledge. And it seems like that's where the real debate is, like, okay, what does it mean to know what it's like? And you have to take a very strong empiricist sort of stance on that, it seems, to make the line work.
So I think once you accept something like my a priori conceptual analysis of what it's like and, what sensory qualities are, then you do indeed know what it's like. And then you say, but no, I don't. And I say, well, yeah, you do. And then the person who disagrees is going to say, and what they're going to say, I think, is going to be something about probably imagining. or conceiving, I can't picture that or something. And I'll say, oh, right. You don't get those things from knowing what it's like.
Mhm.
You only get those when you can apply compressed representations automatically to yourself. And so, yeah, I think all that probably puts me right into Dennett, but which is fine. And so because all the ability is doing there is blocking this kind of next move.
Right.
And so in that sense, yeah, I think that's fine. But I've got to define what it's like, and knowing what it's like in a way such that you do know what it's like in the room. I think that's right. And I think I do by doing the stuff the compressed automation and quality spaces
So
and
Mary
all that
does
stuff.
know what it's like, according to you.
So in that sense, she does. Yeah. Now, question: is there another sense of knowing what it's like? Then Lewis, yes, knowing how, or no, that's all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Dennett. But still, if Dennett's right, there still might be some further thing to say about why you feel that doesn't work.
Right.
The sort of lingering, and then I can play my card either place.
Okay.
For kind of historic reasons, I went with the Lewis, and I think I did that partly because I read it. I really liked that paper by Lewis. I think it's another one of the underappreciated papers,
Yes.
Not because of the ability part, but because of the other stuff he does.
Yeah.
He's got this whole laying out of the problem, which I think, because he takes very seriously the Jackson thing, and he's trying very hard to say, what is this stuff I'm missing? And he really does. And he also points out that if you make this stuff weird enough, I'll be missing it, but then you've made it really weird.
Yeah, exactly.
And weird is not impossible. It's just weird. And I think that's also a nice way to kind of say the Quinean, definitional point. Like, it's just.
You're breaking up. Hold on. We got to wait again a second. Right when you get to the good stuff, the computers say no. Not yet. Yeah, I don't know why. I'm sure you'll be back in a second since you have every other time. Okay, so there you go. I hear you now.
Yeah. Okay.
It's weird. No. Some people like weird stuff. Eric's book, defending.
That's right. I'm into weird stuff, but so weirdness isn't inconceivable. Weirdness is just weird.
Yeah.
And what you want, curiouser and curiouser, as Lewis says in that paper. So
Mary in her room before she gets out, on your view, she knows all the stuff about compression, I assume. She knows that because that's part of your. I mean, we haven't even got to that stuff, but you give an argument that this is kind of how brains have to work. If they're going to melt down, otherwise they'll blow up. It's like very bad. So she's gonna, in your mind, in your picture, Mary knows all this stuff. She knows all the stuff about like the quality space stuff, which I'm skeptical of, but that's a different story. She knows about that stuff. She knows about the compression stuff. So she knows in one sense what it's like to see red. She's still going to learn something when she comes out of her room, right? Which is that this is what it's like for her to see red, or do you say? So that's one thing I've always. But she learns how to identify stuff, how to imagine things. But she doesn't learn what it's like for her. So is that what you?
So she knows that when she sees red, she will be in a state with quality. It's more like purple than it is like green. She knows the whole structure and all of the internet-related connections. Fire trucks are red. She knows all this stuff. And she'll be in a state like that, and it will seem indescribable. It'll seem simple, and it will seem continually connected, and she'll know it directly. She knows all that stuff is what happens when she sees red, and now she's seeing red, and she's like, oh yeah, just like what I thought. And that's the Dennett way of thinking.
But so how is it just like what she thought? Because I mean, it seems to me there's still.
I am indeed in a state more like blah, 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 more like less, with this kind of relational structure that nonetheless doesn't seem to be relational. It seems intrinsic. And I know why it seems intrinsic, because of the processes going on inside me.
Yeah.
When I access it in this way.
But the redness of the red, so she know all that stuff. I agree with you. I'll grant you that. But isn't there still room for her to be surprised in the sense that she looks at the red, she's like, oh, it's different than I would have thought. Like, I didn't know it would be like I knew it'd be closer to green, or not farther away from green than closer to pink. But that's what it means to be closer to red, closer to pink than it is to green. Isn't there still room for that kind of surprise? In which case you get the same sort of picture all over again, or do you have to rule that out?
So I think that's a good question. I think, and here you can kind of, this is again a card. Mary is not like us.
Kendrick Lamar, not like us.
As Kendrick Lamar tells us, she's not like us.
Exactly.
And so my son, so she's not surprised, but of course we're going to be surprised. And anything remotely in our ballpark, our normal way of doing these things, yeah, we're going to be surprised. But so that's one way to go. And another thing is to say, well, I don't know, she might be surprised in a sense because she couldn't imagine it before. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't match with her failed imaginings. But nonetheless, what it is this physical stuff. And the ability she lacked was the ability to imagine it. And so there, maybe the Lewis thing is a little bit better.
But doesn't the zombies sneak back in? The conceivability of them? Because
I'm not sure. Yeah, so I think I have to deny that she's surprised. But I feel like, so if you can, so my thinking kind of going into the ability stuff was maybe if you can enrich the ability stuff enough without crossing some magical line, you can kind of play that card I just played and it will do work. And I'm not sure that it does. Now, Lewis is very explicit that it doesn't do that. Mm-hmm. He just says he got this from Gilbert Ryle, who he likes. Yeah. Like, it's just Ryle. Like, Ryle's good. And we all think, no, Ryle's bad. He's a behaviorist. And so, yeah, we need to put more in there. And later Lewis puts more in, maybe with should a materialist believe in qualia. He also in the Mad Pain, Martian Pain has this kind of thing which is very similar to. He's got like the two kinds of representations that don't line up, and there I'm not sure how it maps exactly to his own view. But I feel like whatever's going on, so long as there's nothing exceptional floating around, right? And I agree. Like this is always I will. So whatever we both shouted out to there, but the beauty of the Jackson, both for good or ill, is the way it puts you every time you try to make it work, it pops back up.
Yeah,
clever motherfucker,
exactly. He thought of it at lunch.
yeah, that'll work. And so I really like the paper where he gives it up. Mind and Illusion is the name of the paper. And he tries to say sort of he talks about richness at that point, the richness of the representations. And then at the end, he says, so therefore the ability hypothesis is right. But it took a detour through this kind of rich representationalism to see it. That's all I got.
Okay.
Because, I'm trying to say something like that. It's like the richness of the representation somehow shows you something about why the separation seems so plausible. But in the end of the day, we don't have to accept that separation because it's not warranted by the data or something like that. Wow. So that's the illusion thing is in there. And I'm working on a thing. I gave a real preliminary kind of sketch. I gave a paper called Disillusioned Mary. I always start with titles. I had no idea what the paper was. Disillusioned Mary. And I gave it at maybe the SSPP last year. And I was trying to work through some of these ideas. Like, how does illusion intersect with this? If we're just physical and so what do we do with Mary? And it's you can just say the Dennett thing, but it's sort of interesting. Why is Mary even plausible? Why does Mary even get off the ground? It's sort of an interesting question. Why are we worried about Mary then at all?
My view about Mary is that I like it that it stems from concept empiricism, and that in the room she doesn't have the phenomenal concepts. So once she goes out and sees red, she acquires the concept, and then she'd be able to do the a priori deductions. But you need the concepts first. So I've always taken seriously that she would learn something. She would learn what it's like, but that's acquiring a concept.
Right.
And then after that, the a priori stuff she could do, like deducing that. Oh yeah, and some people deny that, like the Martina Nito Rumlin stuff.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
that I don't find very plausible.
Do her concepts? I mean, why can't you go the question? Why can't you learn the concepts? Is the question, and then what are the reference of her concepts? And so it's obviously we have two things. It's like phenomenal concepts. We have two kinds of concepts pointing at the same reference.
Exactly.
Why can't she figure that out? Or I mean, so that I'm sympathetic. I think my view would give, in one way to read my view is to say it's a story about phenomenal concepts. And I have some sketchy little things I'm doing at the end there where I say something like, this would be a question about concept acquisition and concept individuation.
Right.
And this is a big problem, which it is. It's sort of, it's hard to know.
Bye.
But I think, I think that's the way to go. And it's like, and so it's, again, so long as it's not exceptional, which I take it, you're on the right side of the fence here.
Yeah.
Even if you're more nettish.
Well, I mean, I guess no, I'm not, because I think that they're exceptional in that sense, but they're physical still. So
So what makes them exceptional there is that they can't be explained in any further way. They just are identical.
Yeah, because of the Nagel stuff. A lot of the stuff. But I mean, on the other side of the fence, I split my views between the kind of, Mary could do the deductions. There's nothing exceptional. Or maybe it's still exceptional, but it's only seeming exceptional given their lack of knowledge. And then the other view is that no, they're really exceptional, but they're still physical. So
I mean, and again, there's a deeper question which I haven't picked up, which is where Chalmers puts in type Q in his paper in the Mind in the Physical World, or whatever it's called. It's like, if Quine may break down that distinction, and I said as much. Pete and I have a paper called Type Q Materialism, which that's one of the bits, but I've never sort of followed up and figured out what that really means in this context. It's sort of, okay, what does that do to your concepts? And that's of course the real question. And I don't know the answer. So it's a good project.
Yeah, it is. You should get a graduate student to do that. But people are saying in the chat that they like the Type Q Materialism. I myself am skeptical of it, but anyway, so that's interesting. I do wonder, so since we're talking about this, we haven't really, gotten to the debunking argument stuff. But so I first want to ask you about illusionism, and then I want to ask about the debunking stuff, and then I have something about Discworld properties. But, I know, so if you ever have to go, let me know. Otherwise, I will keep you here forever. And much like Mary's womb, we'll let you out.
I got nowhere to go.
Indeterminate point. Okay, good. Okay, so I am curious about the debunking strategy, generally speaking, which you spend a lot of time on in the book. And so I don't want to forget about that. But I also want to make sure to point out that you don't think of yourself as a strong illusionist, and that you're adopting what you call a weak illusionism. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about why aren't you a strong illusionist? Like, your view seems like someone could have your view and be a strong illusionist. So why do you resist it?
Right. And I think, so the short and sad answer, oops, sorry. I'm about to answer the question and my internet doesn't want me to. I'm back. Okay. So the short answer is rhetoric.
Okay.
It just sounds better. You get to avoid a certain kind of simple sneering,
Galen Strawson won't call you a woo.
Galen's biggest woo woo, right? And the kind of and Dave has that short in one of the illusionist response papers, a short argument that pain exists. Okay.
Said in that tone of voice, exactly.
So okay, so I can avoid that, which I think but rhetoric matters in that the idea is hopefully that if I can avoid that simple thing, at least they have to say why. They have to say a bit more. You make the other side say more, which is actually important for the debate. So if they just could say, "Oh, you're an idiot," there's pains, and then you stop talking, that wouldn't be so great.
Right.
You'd like to have at least in the philosophy realm, not so much the science realm, maybe see Hakuan Lao, but we're philosophers, so we want to talk about this stuff. And if my view is a little bit richer, so like one of the people who's read the book again because he agreed to do a review of a certain kind, is Torren Alter, and Torren very much disagrees with it. But he thought it was thoughtful, and he wanted to respond, and so that's kind of the target,
right,
in a way of keeping it there. But the deeper issue is, I just think, I don't think I'm eliminating consciousness. I think that the best theory says that, kind of quite like everyone would say, quite obviously we're conscious, and what we want is an explanation of how physical systems could be conscious, and I'm trying to give that. And in doing so, I think I do have to jettison maybe some intuitive ideas about consciousness. And so I think that's maybe what weak illusionism amounts to. But like Amy Kind said to me when I gave some version of this long ago, she's like, aren't you just explaining consciousness? Like, what do you mean illusion for? And in a way, I think it is a fine line. And I think for some people, they would just say, yeah, it's just a reductive story about consciousness, totally cool. No illusion needed. Whereas I think, in a way, it's also partly to engage. I like the idea, this is maybe back to the rhetoric point a bit, but of engaging with the people like Joe Levine, especially, who's one of my favorites to talk to about this, is you want to.
Oh, you cut out. You've cut out. Sing a little ditty. No ditty.
No back. Ditty. Right? Let's not.
No more singing ditties.
That's right. Doesn't Eminem has a song about that. But anyways, exactly. Again, my sons. So, I want to accept as much as possible the data as the other side sees it.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think I can explain the data, right? And I don't want to rule out their data sort of from the get-go. And so I think weak illusionism, I think but of course, Frankish might say, I do that too, I just end up in a different place. And that might be right. But I think there's something to trying to kind of hold on to some of these things or allow them into the door, into the room in a way that, anyways, keeps the debate flowing. So it's not that deep, especially given that I'm a Quinean.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't think of yourself as a phenomenal realist?
So I do.
Okay, you do.
But that's because I've already, and maybe Sellers is the right person to look at here. What Sellers does, he takes a term and he redefines it and then proves that he's got it.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe I'm doing that. But I think it's a legitimate thing to do. The redefinition or the regimentation of the concept, is totally normal, and I'm normal. What are you doing? You're the crazy philosopher here. I'm just a normal guy. And then once you properly, this one, of course, what Rosenthal's a master of, you lay it out in this precise way, and then everything fits. And so, I don't know.
But so one of the things about the Sellers and Rosenthal also is the idea that these are theoretical posits, and so you kind of seem to walk a line where you say, yeah, but the thing we're theorizing about is real, but these are theoretical posits.
Right.
And so I wonder, like, there does seem to be a bit of a tension there, because I often read the theoretical posits line as saying, well, we don't know if that thing is real or not, but this is our best explanation of like what people do and so forth and so on. So
so this is very much.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Again, the kind of foundational stuff we were talking about at the beginning, and I think the posits of our best theory are real, and I also think.
But what does that mean when you say real? What you mean is just like a good explanation. It's the best explanation.
So I think let's just start a little farther back. I think our best theory says that there are tables. And that best explains why when I turn back, the table's still here. It's a better theory than Berkeley's.
Uh-huh.
And that's how you beat Berkeley. And then you just work outward from that. And, and everything is like that.
So are you denying
So
the myth of the given? Is there a given or is there not?
I think there's no given.
Okay.
But I don't think there's a given. But and I agree. I'm now on. There's a knife's edge here. Dennett lived on this edge between realism and anti-realism right here. This is sort of the spot where it's hard. You can quickly fall either way here. And I think if you fall toward the realist side, you tend to get in more trouble, but then you're a little bit more properly engaged. And if you fall the other way, you're probably going to win, but you're not going to have any friends. And so that's why you stay on the knife's edge. And now, but then you dig deeper and you say, wait, what is this knife's edge exactly? And it might be that what this knife's edge turns on is the analytic-synthetic distinction or something like that. And so there, it's just not clear that anyone has a sharper line than I do, or something like that. But that's again a big Quinean realism, science, metaphysics thing.
Right.
But I think it matters here. Now, in the grander scheme, all my friends and I will agree, like that Chalmers is wrong. And then we'll disagree. We'll fight about these lines from our own perspectives using more local rules. And so me and you, or me and Pete,
right,
will disagree about these things, but we'll all agree that there's no qualia in the bad sense. And people say there's no qualia, and I'll say, well, there's qualities, statutory qualities, and you'll say, something more representational, whatever you say. And so, and then the rules for that fight will be we'll have more common ground to fight about. And so now you're asking me a question about like sort of me versus Frankish. We're pretty much the same. That full disclosure. There's nothing Keith and I sort of disagree about in the grand scheme, except for what to call things. And I think that is pretty thin, right? And so I want to call myself a phenomenal realist, but there's no qualia. And Keith is like, well, that means you're not a phenomenal realist. And you can sort of see why that's less of an interesting debate than why we both disagree with Chalmers. But I think
and there's
I don't have a great.
You both disagree with Chalmers for the same reason. A large part of the illusionism stuff is like, it's exceptional.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit with science.
So what's interesting too is and again, this is, I don't know why I was talking about this in the context of, for some reason, of Turing, like what machines know, and do they already know everything they know, and he says, well, maybe the things we think are so novel and creative that we come up with are just the result of well-planted seeds that someone taught us. And Rosenthal, he started out really writing about why Rorty is wrong about eliminativism.
Yeah.
Why, and I think that stuff stuck pretty deeply with me. But I before I went to grad school, I read Dennett. And so I think I'm less sure about this stuff than David is about what's real and what real means. And so, I don't have a great line there. And I think especially once I really put Quine on the table, I have very few ways to make the distinction that I want, that distinction at all.
Yeah.
Guilty as charged, so long as, science wins or whatever, naturalism that I like wins or something.
So is Dennett an intentional realist on your way of thinking then?
I think, yeah. Uh-huh. You have to sort of take real patterns. You have to kind of go Dennett has a lot of stuff in him that you can make him more realist looking.
Yeah.
And you amp up that, or like in the kind of, it's like 2015 in that online thing, Dennett has a nice paper where he's like, people say that I'm a crazy realist. And you're like, Dan, you said that like in 50 publications. What the he's like, I am not denying that. And so he does at times play that other card. Mm-hmm. And so one can cite, it's sort of like an inconsistent corpus. Like, I know that he changes, but, so I think the real patterns part of Dennett and the sort of realist part, also the realist part of the parts of Sellers where he's a scientific realist, and the places in Quine before he really goes for the full underdetermination stuff. All those are the things I like.
Okay.
Now, whether I can have them.
Yeah, that's the interesting question. You're broken up again. Gotta wait. I mean, because while we're stalling, I'll just opine that I think part of the realism stuff that sticks with me about Dennett is whether you're going to find these states in the brain. And I take it that Dennett denies that that's the case, in which case I don't really see him as much of a realist. If the propositional attitudes don't have some physiological realization, then it seems like you're giving up on something that's important. And maybe in your view, I'm not sure, is
Yeah.
there going to be a state of the brain which is the conscious state, or are these like things that you just make sense of from the outside?
So that's a good question. I tend there to be more realist than Dennett, to be sure. That I think there's a kind of way to read back from the intentional stance as something in the brain. But I think there's something about holism in play here, maybe, that atomic individuation of states is actually much messier than people like Fodor think. And so on that, so I want to be, again, kind of in between. And interestingly, I think Sellers and Ned, sort of conceptual role semantics, but kind of really worked out. It's an interesting question how that works. And of course, Fodor has arguments against them. But I still want to say ultimately that there's a way that the brain is the truth maker for these claims.
Okay.
How much more do I got to say? Right. So I'm a holist about mental content and that sort of stuff. And so once you say that, it becomes very messy, which is, okay. And then, okay, the real worry for a naturalist like me is, have I made it too messy to do neuroscience? That'll be bad.
Yeah.
But then you might say, well, these neuroscientists are just cheating. They think they've got brain. This is why they can't agree on things, is because they don't really have a good notion of these things. But I don't really want to weigh into that. I don't want to mess with them. And so, so in that sense, I think I probably want more of a realistic picture. I like the idea then, again, of computational states, and they should be relatively well defined. I think the brain can be seen in that way broadly. And once you're doing that, I think you can get states in a reasonable sense. And that explains why the intentional stance works. And so it's richer than Dennett in that sense, I think.
Okay. Just as a parenthesis, I do wonder, because the holism stuff, especially about concepts, especially coupled with higher order theory, does seem to have some implications for whether infants are conscious or not. Do you have a worked out view on that, or is that something you're not?
I mean, so
you cut out. They're trying to stop you. You're still cut out. I'll just mention there's going to be a cool conference coming up at NYU on infant consciousness.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, Claudia's cut. That looks great.
Yeah, it looks cool.
So I think that there's a decent sense in which there's some initial minimal concepts that infants can have.
So you're not a holist.
Yeah. I mean, well, their holistic space is very small and then it expands.
A holist of one?
I don't think it's going to be just one. And so there's an interesting question about what the minimal amount needed to be aware of anything. Probably and here, back to the essential indexical thing, they need some kind of selfie type thing, something like that. Now that might be innate or very, yikes. And then all my empiricist credentials go out the window.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're not really all that aware until they begin to distinguish themselves and others in some minimal sense, but still one that requires an interaction with their mom and dad or whatever, and where they begin to sort of recognize that somehow at some level, and I imagine it's quite natural that these things would be there, that they have to be triggered in the right way to sort of turn on when they engage others. And that initial stuff all happens maybe initially non-consciously. There's some kind of, and then it bootstraps in. But I don't have a great line. I mean,
so
you can hear
a kind of holism that's not inferential role based. So these infants aren't doing inferences, one assumes.
Yeah. So it might. So again, I guess maybe I don't know if I want to bite the bullet There's a question: can they be conscious at all? What do you need for that? And then what can they be conscious of? And initially, it won't be very much, but it might be there's some minimal amount of holistic connection that you have to make before you can even get off the ground in the first place. It's not just me, but it's sort of me and you disagree, there might be some kind of appearance reality kind of thing. That's not what I thought was going to happen. There's some kind of expectation that's violated, where then you begin this modeling of me and the world, and boom, then the lights turn on. Now, this is driven by my theory, right? I already think higher to thought. It's just trying to fit it in there. The holism question is interesting there. I hadn't thought of it quite like that. That would also be a limit on how soon babies can get off the ground.
Yeah.
So that's a good question.
I mean, I've read a little bit about that. I've been in classes with Rosendahl where he says they don't start doing this until after maybe 8 months, 9 months, close to a year.
Yeah, right. And he seems very confident about that one. Yeah, exactly. As he does. This is like the way to not say anything. It's an empirical question where I'm not really sure that's at all a help, because without a theory, there's no way the data is going to tell us anything here, especially. People have theories and then they look at babies and think if it fits their theory, because what else are you going to do? And so if we have good reason in adults to think higher thought is right, then it's a burden on us, the higher thought folk, to sort of then extend it backwards and see where it goes.
So this is
if we have a notion
heavy approach in Birch's terminology.
Say again?
This is like a theory-heavy approach in Birch's terminology.
Yeah. I think that I don't see quite how to handle baby data. I mean, I kind of think this about everything as a Quinean, but it's especially bad here, because babies are just hard. It's hard to figure out what's going on. And especially if you require, as it were, something like reporting data. You're not going to get Google. They suck on the pacifier more. What the fuck does that mean? It's like, and people have whole theories built on that stuff, right? Like, oh, therefore Quinean is wrong, or some of the best scientists in this field, like Susan Carey and Liz Spelke, who are top of the line. I mean, they know the problem. But I think from the perspective of these theories of consciousness, and especially as philosophers, it's going to be theory heavy. The main thing I do think is if we had some independent data. I mean, there are ways to be falsified here, but if we have good reason to think that there are no concepts there, but they're conscious, it fucks at least it fucks, especially David's canonical vision of it.
Yeah.
So exactly also, I kind of am willing to kind of go a bit more minimalist, and this is don't tell David if he's watching it.
Well, so this is exactly the line he takes in his book.
So higher order. So what is a thought for David exactly?
Yeah, I know. It's a theoretical posit.
Right, and so you might then play around with it enough to make it thin enough to work there. Then it might, and this is why I remember I once saw Bill Lycan go up to David and say, "We agree about everything, David. Why are you yelling at me?" And David was like, "Well, no, because you're wrong." And, it looks a little bit more like higher order perception. At least at that initial level, that would at least maybe help with this problem.
Yeah.
Depending on what you think is required for perception, of course, and Well,
because Ned's argument in his new book is exactly that infants seem to be able to use concepts about shape and kind, but not about color. But so maybe that might be suggest something or an answer. So I have a response to that. Hopefully, we'll see if it
that's cool.
But
yeah, anyway. Ned loves that stuff, and and again, that's one of the places where Ned, the part of Ned where he piles all the studies on you.
Exactly.
Like, there's 70 studies that show you're wrong. And you're like,
that's good. I love that type of stuff.
But also you look and there's not 70 studies. There's one study that 70 people have cited, and Ned read it wrong.
I don't know.
And then you write a paper. It's great. I love Ned. That's exactly how it goes.
There's at least more than two. So we are running on time because I have to be done by the time the kids get home from school. But so I want to make sure to get to this question about the debunking arguments, generally speaking. I do think you kind of outed yourself as an illusionist in a sense, a strong one. I have a death first sort of attitude towards strong illusionism. But I think everyone's got to accept weak illusionism. So I think it's kind of interesting. Even Chalmers is a weak illusionist, by the way.
Yeah, right.
So I think it's interesting where the line is. But anyway, so about the debunking strategy generally, the way it proceeds is, so there's a thing. We want to give an explanation of it that doesn't mention the thing. So then you undermine belief in the thing, generally speaking. So that's how I paraphrase it. I wonder if that's too strong, because it sort of seems like you debunked everything. Like, because you do the same thing about water. Like, there's an explanation of water. It doesn't mention it. It mentions H2O, but not water. So does that mean I don't have any reason to believe that there's water now? So I just wonder, like, where do we draw the line in this debunking strategy, and especially in terms of the explanation that doesn't mention it? Because ultimately, if you're a reductionist, all the explanations aren't going to mention the reduced things. Right. So then what? I don't believe in chairs anymore. Like, we're back to that.
Yeah, and again, I think you're right. I think these are, as it were, sides of the same coin of the eliminativism, reductionism debate. But I mean, so, and Frankie has this line like, look, you learn that you can, how a bunch of stuff happened to the world. You don't then call that God. You think, therefore, there's no God. That's why you should be global, strong illusionist. Mm-hmm. And I think, and again, I'm not sure there's anything strong here, but look, so let's say we are looking for meaning in our lives.
Yes.
And we learn that there's no supernatural being. Does that mean that our lives have no meaning? Now, for some people, of course, the answer is yes. Oh my God, this is the end of meaning. I think no. As a humanist, like my mother, I think no. Meaning is what we do here. Of course, there's meaning, and it's meaningful that you and I are here talking and having this cool time, and this is what life's about. Unless you think something special about meaning, So you can debunk sort of some of it without killing it. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know. I mean, I went with I think that the debunking thing was kind of trendy when I wrote it, and which is a little embarrassing to say. Like, there was a lot of stuff about debunking in moral, metaethics and all these other places, which was cool stuff. Sharon Street and others. And so I was reading and talking to some of my colleagues about that. Colleague Dave Phillips, who writes on that stuff, and Justin Coates. And I was like, oh, that's kind of reminded me, sort of rung bells with me. As often people see sort of philosophy of mind, sort of especially sort of in its metaphysics and metaethics, often seem to run, and as you would know, in parallels. So I kind of started thinking about debunking, and so there's this intuition or strong belief that there's something inexplicable here. And, people have that in other places, like, they see, something in the night sky that might be a drone or whatever, and it's a UFO, and you tell them, no, it's not, it's just a drone. And when you've told them that, why does that work? Because UFOs are much weirder. There's sort of a burden thing that I like there. It's sort of like, if I give you a normal explanation, it somehow kind of wins. You've got to now say, no, here's why the normal thing doesn't work. And I wanted to find that parallel. That's the optimism. Like, find the parallel where I make them have to defend their weirdness, as opposed to merely me trying to get rid of the obvious, right? And so they're the ones saying, UFO, Loch Ness Monster, and I'm the one saying, drone and, just some ripple and a badly redone photograph. And so that was the initial thinking. And then, of course, there's this whole rich literature on debunking because of Sharon Street and these other people, and in a number of places, philosophy of cognitive science of religion, philosophy of religion. And so I got sort of interested in that. And my colleague, Luis Oliveira, who's an actual epistemologist, I just pretend to be an epistemologist, was like, oh, you should check out like Pollock and these people. Like, this is on undercutting. This is kind of nice way to map it. And so I just sort of found that sort of a nice way to think about it, that somehow that I could undermine their evidence, and then zombies don't get off the ground. Mm-hmm. Undercut their evidence. And what is their evidence? Well, it's how things seem to you in experience. So Now, again, one can simply, it's not clear how different, and in fact, David Roosevelt said this to me. It's like, why is that debunking and not just exactly what you said? Why don't you just explain it? And I was like, yeah. I mean, so again, it was, this is a pro tip to all you young philosophers out there and academics. Often you do the thing that's sexy because then you get published. By the time I wrote this book, though, and it went rejected and reviewed, it sort of was no longer sexy. It's unsexy. But I still, whatever. I still think it's kind of cool. There's something about that. But whether there's a real strong distinction between explaining and explaining away, again, I don't. You're right, and I'm not sure how to draw a stronger line, unless one has already sort of fully got the kind of framework story down. Like, oh, this is normal and this is abnormal, and somehow there's a really abnormal one that you can then it's slightly different. Like, so do you explain the Loch Ness monster or do you explain it away? I mean, so I think it's more like the Loch Ness monster and less like these things that are just explained. But again, it's not a deep point. Though again, and again, here's I don't know if it's sexy, but if Dave's doing it, it's got to be sexy. Dave Chalmers lays out a debunking argument in the responses to the illusionist big multi-issue thing that he did, where he's like, you can generate this kind of debunking argument, and so I was very happy to see that because then I could just steal his thing, right. Which was great. And so, but I was already sort of, down that road, and I thought, but it's an interesting question. I think you're right also about partial debunking and debunking bits of things and not all of them. And when do you eliminate and when do you just still call the thing, which again is the God and the meaning and Dennett has this thing about real magic. It's a similar. Dennett has lines which very much inspired Frankish. Like, once we show that there's no magic, but notice I just said no magic. But anyway, I said no, that is magic. Those guys are magicians.
Exactly. Real magic is fake magic.
Right. And it's like so. Yeah. And what again? You get this very interesting question about realism.
Yeah.
Which is again, I think one of the big things. I think as philosophers, especially naturalists, scientifically minded philosophers like ourselves, it's interesting to see how those sort of big metaphysical and issues play kind of bounce off of the science and also allow you to understand the science, which of course is deeper. And I think those are the big questions.
Yeah. So, okay, interesting. That's somewhat surprising, but all right. So about the specific...
I feel like I let you down. Well,
damn it, Josh. I'm out of here.
Oh, God. I blew it. You were doing so well.
You had one shot, man. One shot. No, just kidding. About the specific debunking, because you mentioned the qualitative inaccuracy thesis as a way to debunk, I guess, the revelation argument or just a general idea that there's something contingent here, or I don't know exactly how that all fits together. But I was a little bit, it did strike me that when I first read your statement of the qualitative inaccuracy thesis, I thought that maybe your use, that it was kind of weak actually. And that the way you wanted to use it seemed like you needed something stronger. You needed to say, sort of to deny revelation, which you do get to later, and you do have some things to say about that. But I wondered so the qualitative inaccuracy thesis, just that sometimes we can be wrong about our qualitative states.
Well, but it's a little stronger in Pessimism, which is why maybe he's a strong illusionist in that part of the book. It's wrong about the qualitative natures, which is this term of metaphysical art. Pessimism is a master metaphysician, to be sure, and I'm not 100% sure what it means.
Right.
I took it to mean the sort of underlying nature, which of course. But qualitative suggests maybe it needs to be phenomenal. And so I'm reading it the first way that we're wrong about the underlying hidden nature. And if you make it about the phenomenal nature, then it looks eliminativist.
Yeah.
And so I actually wrote a response paper that was rejected. I should say all these things like, insider baseball and my grievances. You people have let me down. I wrote a paper which was rejected in one of those Chalmers volumes on because I said some of the stuff about pair boom, and they were like, well, this is wrong because pair boom is a strong illusion. It's, strong illusions. And I was like, I did ask pair boom this, and he said he wasn't. But of course, maybe he is. He doesn't know it. And also, that part of the book he doesn't even care about, right? So that book is like a schizophrenia. It's like it's a multi-personality book. It's like, here's the part you could be an illusionist, and then there's the part where you can be a panpsychic or whatever, a neutral monist, and here's the part where you could be a reductionist in this very complex and strong sense, which is a very interesting part of the book. And I just like that first 4 chapters. I'm like, yes, yeah, you did it. And then everyone else like, oh, these other chapters. I've read reviews of the book. They're like, just skip the first 4 chapters. That's bullshit. The other parts are awesome. Each part, everyone sees what they want to see there. So I read him in a distinct way. I tend to read that his analogy with color post-Galilean sort of stuff. It's sort of, once we learn kind of that we're in the Galilean world, do we think there's still color or not? And he says yes. And he talked about sort of, initially we think it refers to this non-physical thing, and now we think it either refers to some physical thing that's like a punctate thing that just will stand in, or if we don't think that works because color is a big mess in the world, then it's some sort of complex sort of spread of whatever we're pointing to at various times. But he's got this kind of movable concept thing, which I quite liked, and that looks to me like, again, and then I start reading it more Quinean, but which again I don't think it's what pair boom would do. Is somehow like we can revise the concept depending when the new information comes in from the science. And what we revise to, though, is still something we're going to call the thing, color. Unless it's not, it's schmuller, but then we're in this debate about what we call. And so I was like, let's go realist there. I don't think it drops out of pair boom. I think I'm interpreting pair boom. And I think it was a fair rejection of my paper, probably in that context, that I was sort of, I needed to argue for it. And to argue for it, I would have to say a bunch of Quine shit, which never would have gotten in there. So, I wasn't going to go down that road. Plus, I only had like, so yeah, it's another place where again, the realism, anti-realism line is sort of coming up, or the eliminativism, reductionism line is coming up. And I want to fall on a certain side of that line when I want to.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, that's, and I want to do that, by saying, then I appeal to this very underdetermined thing. The best theory says there's color. Which is sort of what pair boom says. He's sort of looking historically and saying, we should talk about red and color. And so it's whatever that. Now there are color people who don't think that, and Dirk knows. But the best theory, one, we don't know what it is, and two, probably doesn't tell you that. And so I do think, and I don't think, and this is maybe my sort of Rosenthalian / Lewis kind of thing about the common sense in the regimenting of it. Like, I think it does less mutilation to our web of belief to keep these things in this way, to keep the names the way that they are, and to fit them in with science at the same time. I just think it just does less damage. And that is a theoretical virtue in the sense of what makes a theory a better theory. Now, if you've embraced all that Quinean stuff, then I can make that claim. If you don't think that, you'll look for some other thing there. But I try to defend all that stuff at once.
I mean, I guess I'm a little bit more. I should ask Derek if he wants to ever talk to me. But I just realized that I should do that. But anyway,
so the things I've seen him do, he and Tor and Alter have talked about physicalism and panpsychism and neutral monism in a lot of interesting ways. So he doesn't seem all that keen on the first part of the book.
Yeah,
at least, but still, some of my students saw him he gave a talk at Rice and I wasn't around. And some of my students, I just taught this stuff, like some version of this, and they went up and like accosted him, and he's a very nice guy, and was like, I don't know if he just said something to make them go away, but it was probably like, no, I think there's qualitative states, there's experience.
That's what all the illusionists say.
That's right, and that's what makes you want to be like, well, then what are we right? And I get it. It's the term phenomenal, which is a term of art, right? It's a term of theoretical term of Dave's and Ned's. They believe in experience. It's not phenomenal consciousness, and they're quite right, I think, to challenge that. But I think the way to challenge it is the kind of Salarzian redefine it in the way you want, and then say, yeah, sure, we got it. And then make the other side say why you cheated.
Yeah. So you're not really, I mean, because you say in the book that you want to give the other side as much of their side as you can, but you're not really doing that. You're giving them all their terminology. It's defined differently.
So it's also, I think that's Hegel. That's the part of Sellers that's Hegelian. Like you redefine all the terms, and then everything falls from the dialectic in the right way. And I think that that's a methodology. I'm not sure it's great, but I try to be explicit at least about it. That's the kind of say, hey, I am doing this. I'm not pretending I'm not. But I do think it can be defended in the sense that I think, like with the transitivity principle, for example, that people do talk this way. Normal people, they'll say, yeah, if I'm not aware at all that I'm in pain, then pain's not conscious. Now, they may say other things too. Yeah. They do. And that's fine, but at least we're not nothing, and why care about that? Well, because if you come in and just say pain is the firing of pyramidal cells in areas, people go, what does that have to do with pain? And so there's something to the initial setting of the data. And then this is the thing, I don't know the rules of this game, but I learned them implicitly from David. Is whatever we're doing, this kind of this crypto redefinition thing.
Sleight of hand.
And I take it that's the Sellers trick. Whatever, that's what Sellers, and Quine said, oh, it's regimentation, and he spent all this time regimenting, so that really you're not quantifying over something bad, exceptional properties. And so I'm doing that too. I just try to be explicit about it.
Yeah. But also at the same time, you're saying, I want to give them as much of their view as they can, but it doesn't seem like you're giving them any of their view.
Yeah, well, not at the end of the day. I mean, they are going to be wrong. Yeah. But, you want to give them, and this is, of course, also something, Dennett claims, you can see it in, I've gone nowhere, I've gone in a giant circle back to Consciousness Explained. I read the book. I was working at a bookstore before I went into grad school to see if I can read the book like this and still like it. Like, hey, I'll go to grad school. And I really liked the book. But he says, oh, I'm giving them everything they want. This is his heterophenomenology. I'm giving them everything. Yeah. Totally giving them. They're defining the data, and everyone can see the trick. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Just the way the data appears, and oh wait, what? And next thing you know, wait, what happened to the fucking data?
Well, reading Dennett's what got me into philosophy of mind too, but for the opposite reason, because I was like, this fucking asshole needs to pay.
This fucking is wrong. I was like, this guy's on it. Actually, so I read that book, and in there he does consider Rosenthal briefly, and I thought, hey, that seemed pretty good. Wait, what was wrong with that? And it just kind of goes by. And then I didn't know that was David until I got into his class and went, oh, you're that guy. Okay. And it turned out, of course, he had knew Dennett at that point. And so I've always been kind of like Dennett, you want to again tart up, you want to add as much to Dennett as you can to make it work without crossing the line, which we've agreed I have not drawn very clearly, but the line, the unexceptional line. And so I do think adding these things to Dennett is good, because not that it means Dennett was wrong, but it's just a better way of presenting the Dennett or something like that. And then once you learn that about me, that might be like, oh, now I get why I don't agree with you. So it's like you want to just go back to that, and like I kind of do, but I think you can enrich it enough where, and this is where once I've enriched it enough, have I just left the Dennett behind? Maybe. I mean, Dennett himself said that to me, right? He said, I think those were your ideas. Yeah. Like, no, I think they were yours. I was like, there's no way I thought of this. Dennet's like, I remember writing it. Yeah. Someone wrote it.
And in that paper that Rosenthal wrote for the Dennett Festschrift or whatever, where he says, look, I'm basically Dennett. You just need to add some more of your heterophenomenology, which is data about the connectivity principle, which sort of sounds like what you're saying in a way.
And what Rosenthal told me is that he convinced Dan to write that chapter. They were at Bielefeld, and and he read a draft of Conscious Explained. He said, "You've got this little bit here. You need to make this," and that, of course, is very much the kind of Sellers stage setting part, the method part. And I think that's a cool addition. Again, I think you're right. It's not like it gives the other side anything that they want,
Right.
but it gives us, for Rosenthal was very important, it gives that extra step in. It keeps Dennett grounded a little bit more in the folk element, and which I think again is a nice thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's where I would disagree. I think most heavily with the sort of standard traditional higher order approach generally. Like, I'm not really a big fan of the transitivity principle. I think of it as an empirical claim, whereas
Yeah.
I think you guys tend to think of it as something more than an empirical claim. Whereas I think you need some evidence for it. No, that goes beyond
Yeah.
what the folks say or don't say. You want some neuroscience, some psychology that sort of backs it up.
Yeah.
It's not really clear that you do get that. But for you, like, I know in your dissertation, which I read a million years ago, you're like, this is what you got to do first, like, to even get off the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah.
You got to decide what the data is that the theory is trying to explain. And I think you've smuggled in everything in doing that. I mean, I think you probably agree that both sides
So
do that.
in my defense, I think everyone does that, right? So that's the claim. Like everyone is smuggling in the stuff. And I smuggle in my thing, you smuggle in yours, and we fight. And that is the kind of theory ladenness of the data claim thing. Again, and that somehow you got to bring in something to see the data, and so you're smuggling or not, you're bringing something to the table. And so where do you get is there a neutral place to pick up those things? And then, of course, the Lewis kind of, some of Sellers' claim is sort of, well, you look at the folk and Jones and the myth of Jones, or look at something folky and kind of start there. It's a theory, but it's somehow not a bad. It's sort of it somehow has standing. And now I don't think, and this is where Ned, of course, this is exactly where Ned was like, "What the fuck are you? This is exactly the wrong. Oh my god!" And he started screaming at me, and I was like, I'm like, wait a minute, fuck you, no, fuck you. What happened? And so I'm not, so there's something, again, there's something deep about this kind of, I think it's epistemology, or Quinean epistemology, that somehow to even get data, you've already got to be doing something else. And then the something else, what is that? I do think, though, there's sort of the way that there's empirical evidence, and this is, again, the same kind of idea, it's something like reflective equilibrium again. It's sort of like, it was fruitful to do that for science. It was useful. It turned out to be a good principle. Science then moves forward because that's what justifies the principle. Not that I found it sort of dropping out of the neuroscience directly. It's sort of a way to think about the science that then allows the science to do other things. And now I'm not claiming we've done that, but like that would be the way to do it. And that wouldn't be not evidence. That would be the sort of second or roundabout, but empirical evidence ultimately.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. There's a lot I want to say about that, but we only got a few minutes left because of my deadline with the kids. So I guess sort of the final thing I was gonna, there's so many things I want, but one thing I want to make sure to get to is about, so it seems like maybe this is your holism, your descriptivism, but it seems like you're just against any kind of fundamental property. So I wonder, like, the same arguments you give against disk properties, are they going to work against quiddities, against intrinsic natures for physical properties? So all of that stuff is going to fall to this, right?
So that's a good, and I do talk a little bit about that. I think that's a very good question. This is one of these things I bounce back and forth on. That sometimes I just think something like a strong pragmatist line, like you get far enough out there, those things don't do anything. And so it's not that you say they don't exist, but they just don't do any work. Like the quiddities and the intrinsics, they just don't do anything. Once they get in here, you get through the doings, and then you can get at things. And so then my debunking would go all the way out there, maybe. But in a different sense, I say in the book that, look, sticking with my kind of science picture, you might think what you need is something that explains causal properties. That you need something fundamental there, the thing that does the causing. But once you've got that, then you can build everything else.
Causal intrinsics, you call them.
Yeah, and so I sort of a restrictive kind of, I don't even think, I mean, this is actually, again, a place where Rosenthal, said to me, like, why do you think you need any intrinsic? Like, what does that even mean? Like, he gave me a kind of very strong kind of, skeptical line about that. And I didn't have much, again, I didn't have much to say, because what does one say about those things? That's kind of the pragmatist, gambit there. Make you explain the unexplainable. Go. Oh, we win.
Exactly.
And so, but I, there is something that does the causing. Also, one of my colleagues, my colleague now retired, named Greg Brown, big Leibnizian. And he for a while, he didn't talk to me. I'm like, God, this guy doesn't like me. And somebody kind of, you're a Pythagorean. That's what you are. All you think at the bottom is just there's these numbers. And I was kind of like, yeah, maybe. Huh. He's like, ha! And then we became friends. But, I just think you bottom out on those, and you can't go to the next level of the things that are being described by the numbers, or the relata of the relations. I just got relations without relata, and what the fuck. And he gave me this paper by Adams at Cornell. Like the meat, you need to put meat on the bones of reality.
Right.
Great. It's a great paper. Awesome. Another great philosopher recently passed away. And I'm like, okay, the only meat it's sort of kosher. The only meat I'm going to allow is causal meat. There's a book, Causal Meat.
Causal meat, like, for the
meat magic, I can like causal meat together.
Wait, so does this mean you think of yourself as an ontic structural realist?
I think that's what that maybe means. Yes. And again, it's an interesting question for me. Another place where again, my Ganettian, like the paper Real Patterns has a whole literature, right? And so how much can you squeeze out of that? And people differ about how much you can squeeze out of that. And I kind of feel like, so long as those posits do work of some kind, and again, what do you mean by work will be the question here. Is it merely rhetorical work, or is it real work? And but if they do work, then they're real. And so causal intrinsics, I think that feels like something that does work to me, because I don't understand how anything could be going on. I do think reality has meat on its bones, as Adams said. And so now this is we are in a place where we're kind of, it's like Berkeley would deny that. Right. And so, and when you realize that you're in the Berkeley anti-Berkeley debate, you then, I think pragmatists are going to be like, good luck to you. Yeah. Okay. Everything's going to look the same either way. Everything's going to come out exactly the same. So we pragmatists just say, yeah, we're going to spend our time on other things. And so that's maybe my kind of, I have this, the realist kind of urge to go farther, but there's, I don't see quite how to productively do it. But I kind of will concede, for the sake of argument, that for my picture, I think causal intrinsics, the claim is this, that with only causal intrinsics, you can build everything else, including consciousness. And that's an interesting claim.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll go with that.
So I wonder, you mentioned this briefly in the book, but I wanted to ask you about how much the autonomy of the special science matters to your view. Because one way of reading, like, quantum mechanics and those things, is that there is no cause and effect at that level. There's just things that happen, and then cause and effect is like a word we use at the macro level, kind of to shorthand things. But it's you don't say this something caused this electron to be spin up or spin down. You just measure it, and it is that way, one way or the other, for no reason at all. Actually, as a matter of fact, it's random. So I don't know what to say. View, there's no causal intrinsics, and that's what physics is telling us. I mean, that's one way of interpreting it. Yeah. So, but is that yeah? Go ahead.
I mean, so in that case, then I would certainly back off of causal intrinsics. It does raise, of course, an interesting question about what cause amounts to in the special sciences, what mechanisms amount to in the special sciences. All I want to say is sort of whatever at the level that cause or mechanism appears, I want to say that and then extend it to include consciousness. Right. But it is very weird. And also, I'm kind of a Humean. I mean, there's something Humean lurking, right? Like, I just think one thing happens and then another. It's, I'm not going to be, whatever I mean by intrinsic, it's going to get pretty weak when you start pressing me. In which case, it is whatever does work, in our theories. Now, more. I mean, work I think is explanatory. Throughout the book, obviously, explanatory is my thing. I'm like, oh, what matters? And so, if I'm starting with explanation and somehow think that's the, there's an interesting question about what explanatory work is, because it might just be like the preacher tells you God did it and that explained it.
Exactly.
Well, I don't mean that, right? So,
Exactly.
and next thing you know, you're off into the to the depths of philosophy of science, and I kind of waved my hands at that, and I tried to be neutral, quote unquote, about the right model of explanation. But I think it might really matter for what I think is real. So, I think, again, we're in the deep waters here, and as a naturalist and pragmatist, I think certainly the thing you just said about what the science says is going to be certainly something that matters a lot to me. So it might be that will push around my view. But all I really, and this is why mediocrity was maybe a better framing than optimism in a way, because all I'm saying, the anti-Kendrick Lamar, we're not like, we're just like everything else. They just like us.
Yeah,
they just like us. I'm gonna get fired.
Oi, buddy. Okay.
Minor.
Don't say why. Oh my God. Certified level more. Wow. All right. Anyway, so
yeah.
fuck them up, Todd. Anyway, so back to seriousness. So we're running out of time. I have a million things I would love to discuss with you. Maybe I'll have to drag you back someday. But one thing I'm curious about is the automatic compression bit of your theory. We haven't even, we've danced around it. It hasn't come up. We've been doing all the, philosophy, science and stuff, but it seems to me that you think that this is something we have to have. And that if, like, for example, if you had a higher order theory that wasn't endorsing automatic compression, then it wouldn't work on your view, it seems like, because this is really the meat of the easy explanation. You're like, okay, so we can give an easy explanation, but here's the easy explanation. Well, there's this theory that we automatically apply to us, and we use these compressed information bits that are thinkable, but really, really dense in a sense that can't be unpacked. So they appear simple, they appear direct, blah, blah, blah. So that's really an essential part of the picture. Or is it, I guess is what I'm asking. Is it an option, or is it our only option on your view?
So here's it reminded me, I was trying to remember this during our discussion of babies. So it might be that babies are conscious because whatever, but what it's like for them is fully uncompressed. And so they're aware of like all this shit, the buzzing, blooming confusion, as William James put it.
Yeah.
And if you could ask them at that moment, is there a hard problem? They would say no. It's all fucking connected. You can totally see it. And then, well, sadly, they can't talk because they don't have concept. So they've got to compress. And then once they do that, they eliminate access to the relations, the connections, and everything seems separable and punctate and simple. And then the hard problem. So there might be creatures. So then it opens to forget babies. Maybe there are creatures like maybe gods like that can see everything uncompressed. And for them, they wouldn't have a hard problem. Anyways, this came to my mind as I was thinking.
Interesting. And I mean, as a corollary of that, it sort of seems that if you built like an AI that would somehow bypass the need for compression, then you would get a similar result.
And of course, what's interesting then is, and there's this problem in this high-end AI, is that we're not sure what they're doing exactly. That we have trouble interpreting them or interpreting what their internal representational states are and all this stuff, because they aren't forced to compress, or the constraints on them are very different. And so maybe the way to get a machine more like us is to force it into these, like, it's got to have like a limited power pack, kind of, and it's got these evolutionary constraints that are sort of accidents, and then if you have the compression that we have, you'll get to be more like us. But back to the question of consciousness, which was, in a way, what you've sort of shown here is sort of like, look, and I do say this, I'm giving you really a theory of the appearance of sort of qualia appearance, and not of consciousness. And I'm giving you a theory of qualia appearance that's supposed to explain these problem intuitions that we have. Now you add in at that point one of the theories of consciousness, higher thought, or global workspace, or first order kind of looping, or whatever. The sort of easy ones, one of the easy ones, and then you'll get consciousness plus, plus this stuff or something like that. And then so the question is, wait, you didn't explain consciousness. Mm-hmm. But I think the reason people think that those theories aren't good when they tell you is because, and then they'll start pointing back to the qualia. They're sort of like, look, that doesn't explain why red looks the way it does, or that doesn't explain why pain's hurt, or that doesn't explain why I can imagine zombies. And I say, oh, well, you've got act in there, so of course it does do those things. And now, these theories seem more plausible. They seem like possible answers. To some people, it just seems like an utter non-starter to have a theory like higher thought. You're just completely in the wrong direction. It does nothing. And so I'm kind of combining those two things. But back to the kind of question. So what about theories of consciousness? Maybe what they're doing, in my view, and this is a way to think about it, is maybe what they're doing is the direct part, in some sense. Like they are the explanation of directness. And so high order access in the global workspace, it's access, but it's the kind of access that's direct to these special things, well, seemingly special things, right? And so maybe that's what, if it reduces the problem of the naturalized problem of consciousness to kind of a problem of direct access. It makes phenomenal into access in the right way, and the phenomenal thing is still kind of sitting there as the compressed stuff, but we show how it's all accessy. And so these are good questions. It probably, if I just stuck with higher thought, maybe I would have a more direct line on it. That but I like the fact that it's more general,
right?
And it also makes the question of what's the right kind of access is the question. And I think it's kind of a selfie type access. It's like, I am aware of myself as, hence my love of the transitivity, but whatever justified that. Let's assume we've got that. Okay. And there's sort of a richness to that kind of access, as opposed to merely in the global workspace, it's, kind of multi, system access. And I feel like I want to, if it's a thought experiment, I feel like you can have that without being conscious, because, and I want to say why, because it's not the right kind of access. Anyway, so, but I think that's an interesting, what happens to the problem of consciousness if I'm right about the act thing is an interesting question. And I feel like what it should be doing is what I was just trying to describe. It sort of puts these various theories into the hopper where they're fighting about how to explain access to the compressed stuff.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Well, so we got to start wrapping things up here, but I always like to ask at the end if there's anything that you were hoping would come up that hasn't come up, and the answer can be no, but just in case, I'm curious.
Let's see. I mean, I feel like we've done a ton of stuff, and also I really like the kind of metaphysics, realism. That for me has been always a big driver for these questions, which, especially given my minimalist proclivities, my Ganettian proclivities, it always puts me on the spot. So I'm really glad you brought those. I think those are big questions. I guess for me, there's sort of an interesting question about, which I feel like neither of us is qualified to answer. So it's probably good we didn't talk about it. Like, what about this empirical shit I'm pulling up here? Like, I'm kind of grabbing a bunch of empirical stuff and saying, kind of, here, and I'm not as good as Ned at that, because I don't even know what a lot of it means. But I mean, I know it's in the right ballpark. I'm kind of cherry picking to some degree. And the automaticity literature, though, is kind of a little bit fraught, because it's one of those, replication crisis-y places a little bit to some degree. I think the compression stuff is on stronger footing, because there's a whole kind of just computer literature, or even like data literature on that, like just, how to transmit data, which is very interesting. So there is, I think, a deep question about what automatic, even, automatic is maybe a word that now I just kind of said it, like now just means conscious. And so maybe I've kind of collapsed things there in a bad way. And it's also not clear to me 100% in the, like people like, what's his name at NYU? There are people who've written on automaticity in psychology where it sounds a little magical, and also it's one of those social psych dealies that, oh, this is so cool. Wow. And it really should make you suspicious. And I feel like that's a little bit of a danger spot in my empirical data. Now, compression, I think, is cooler, but there it really is that I'm a little bit out of my depth. That was true except for the little bit part. I'm out of my depth. This is actually a place so if you remember back in Taiwan, before the hurricane,
it was a typhoon.
Hakwon said to me, oh, let me send you some stuff about sparse coding. And there's a lot of, and I just barely scratched the surface of that. I think, and how that relates to compression, and is it the right kind of compression and is it too ubiquitous to do there's all these deep questions there. So again, I'm happy we didn't talk about them in the sense I wouldn't have had much to say, but I think there's deep empirical issues there, but there's also, I think it's very fruitful ground, especially the compression side.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of neat stuff there. And it seems to me that, this is, some of the people I cite, like, some of the neuroscience people who that's what they're working on. And it seems to me it would be interesting if their work, this is kind of, actually empirically driven stuff as opposed to the kind of top-down stuff I do. If their work is really entailing something that looks like it would give you the kind of gestalt or the, simple kind of thing, just dropping out of their work, because compression is necessary to make the brain work. And that would be cool. And I know I didn't make
very
that
cool.
one.
And because a lot of this has to do with that expert,
Right. And the expert thing was trying to, bring it from the sort of lower end, the lower level up into the kind of getting close to the, to where consciousness lives, our ordinary experience. And so reading chess, of course, is a famous example that's well worked over, but the reading expertise stuff and how we develop fluency in reading, or how we used to before electronics killed that, there is this interesting process where you just sort of stop seeing it in a certain way to kind of it just sort of works. And it's, anyways, there's neat stuff there. But that is much more at the level of like ordinary everyday experience, not at the level of like, sparse coding in the brain, which is a lower level description. So, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's a whole separate conversation. You're right, but it's interesting that it's empirically based, and it would be nice if you had this kind of line to fall out sort of naturally from.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
And I wrote the book as a book for two reasons. One, the ideas were hanging together for me, and two, it was a way to get promoted. So and so I got promoted and everything, but no one reads the book except for like you and a few other people. I'm trying to break out some of these things into actual articles. Of course, I can expand on some of these themes and whatever, put them in different ways. And one of them certainly is compression as a focal point. Now there are separate things like Mary and that stuff, but the compression one is the most. I think that's something like
and
that's
not really
that's
talked
kind of
about much by philosophers.
Yeah, right. And I kind of got it initially from Douglas Hofstadter's. He talks about it in Gödel Shabbat, very nice, but it didn't seem to get very picked up after that. Then it has some of it, as all the stuff I do. Yeah. But he doesn't put it the way I would. And again, whatever. It's cool. Also, people stopped listening to Dennett when Dave trotted out the zombies. So the more Dennett, the better. And for me, in that sense, and I really like that stuff in Dennett when he's being a realist or anyways, to my mind, more of a realist and just saying these are the things that would do that would explain the appearances. And he's got like the haystack illusion. He's got a bunch of cool things. Also, I should point out, and I have it in the book, which was a discovery on my part. Yeah, this is like so sad. Like my level of research. Like I read some Armstrong I hadn't read, where he's arguing with Norman Malcolm.
Right.
And Malcolm
is cited in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Like because Malcolm is kind of a Wittgensteinian. Like so Armstrong is the realist. And Armstrong is a realist in many ways, but he's a naturalist. And he's trying to sort of say why you should enrich your view of the mind to Malcolm. And he gives these nice, he's got the headless woman thing, which he had, but he has sort of stuff about Gestalt properties and also about mistaking an internal relation for an intrinsic property. For the life of me, to understand what that means, you got to go read like either criticisms of Bradley, or Leibniz, and so, like but it's which is not a bad thing per se. So it's like but that's we're talking about mistaking relational stuff for intrinsic stuff, and so that's it's just again warmed over.
Yeah,
I'm just warmed over Armstrong.
I'd say no, you're making good use of it. But you're right. Yeah. That is interesting stuff. The internal relation stuff I never really fully understood. Armstrong gave a couple classes at the grad center before he died, and I was in those. But I wanted to be on board, but I never fully got. Anyway, so I think there's interesting things there. That's a whole other can of worms, actually. But Josh, I hope that more people read this book. I sincerely commend it to people. I think it's well written. I think it's easy to read for the complexity and the depth that you go into. It was a quick read. There's a lot there. You have to read it. Like I read it twice. But I think it's well worth reading, even if you don't agree with everything that you say. Like you said, it's at least, I think your main goal is to shift the burden onto the other side. And I think it does accomplish that. I think people have to respond to it on the other side. Even people maybe on your own side that don't agree with you should respond to it. So I hope it gets the attention. I know it just came out, so we'll see. But
so promotionally, there's going to be a book symposium in the Journal of Conscious Studies.
Oh, awesome!
With Torrin Alter, who was he read it for my tenure, and he was like, I've got all these questions, and so he was great, and then I roped in Uriah Kriegel and Amy Kind, and they were kind enough to agree, and so they're going to write, and Jake Berger has, because he owed me a favor, is editing it.
Nice. Well, I would look forward to that for sure.
And so that's it's going to take a little time, but it should be out. Hopefully late next year. Late next year, we'll see. Knock on wood. But anyway, at least it's gonna. And that and again, I'm gonna try to break out parts too. But I'm glad you read it, man. I say in there somewhere like like a lot of the ideas I have are me arguing with you and Pete and Uriah and others, just sort of over beers, and that's all I'm doing. And which makes me happy. Like like I'm trying to respond to you. You make me think about this stuff, and you make me, just like today, like you quickly pick up these hard to find weak points.
Well, I appreciate that. You're overly kind, I would say, but I've always thought of you as a great philosopher ever since the grad school days. I always thought you had a fair way of doing philosophy, which I admire. That's something I really look for in people.
Well, right back at you. I feel the same about you, and I'm glad you do this. Also, this public service. I think this is an awesome way to keep the conversation going, but also to extend it outward in the right way.
Absolutely.
Likewise with your Consciousness Online conference, which I'm still citing some of those papers, including like the Churchland paper from your book, and which is awesome. Like that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't done it, and so that's awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that Consciousness, it was a tremendous amount of work. I only stopped doing it because LaGuardia said enough's enough already. Like you got to do some other shit. And I was like, fuck. It wasn't, but I miss it. I always dream of bringing it back, But I really think we need something like that. There's a couple other things that are taking its place, but I do think stuff like that's important. We really got a good anyway. So that's a love fest all around. But I really want to thank you again for joining me, for spending all this time, for being so kind, and just fun to engage with. So I appreciate that, Josh. And if you just hang out for a second, I'll say bye off the air. But thanks again, man.
Yeah.
All right, let's